Okay, welcome. This is gonna be a big meeting. We have normal business this morning, and then this afternoon we get to work together in small groups and dig into the strategic plan. As we get started, I had a few thoughts I wanted to share. I will have thoughts again, both right before the strategic planning, but this is really about the difficulties and the challenges on campuses today. Since we last met, my thoughts, and I'm sure yours, have been with the students, the faculty, the administration, who are charged with leading our universities in a very difficult time, and in times where the best path just isn't clear, and it varies a great deal from campus to campus, and given whatever situation they're dealing with. We all know that dissent and protest have always been at home on college campuses. Historically, protesters have pushed hard against the status quo. They've tested free speech principles and sometimes changed hearts, minds, and policies during the most contentious times in our history. I was a college student in the South during the white hot heat of the civil rights movement. During my college days, Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered. Bobby Kennedy was murdered. The Vietnam War raged on. And college boys I went to school with knew that the draft in Vietnam was their next stop. Just days before my college graduation, the National Guard fired into a crowd of students at Kent State University, killing 4 and wounding 9. At the time, it just seemed incomprehensible to me, and in fact, it still does. I share these memories not at all to equate histories. Histories are far too complex for that, but to reinforce what we already know. College campuses, then and now, are incredibly important spaces for robust debate, spaces where vastly different perspectives on policy, on politics, on history, surface, and should be able to be shared civilly and safely. As campus strife today draws headlines at congressional hearings, university leadership must grapple with threats of violence, harassment, or property damage in real time while fulfilling their responsibility to maintain safe environments. Their jobs to deliver on the promise of higher education have never been more difficult, and we thank the college and university presidents for the difficult work they are doing. At the HECC, our job is to continue to focus on the equitable success of all students with a thriving higher ed and workforce system. And so today we will turn our attention to the future of higher education in Oregon and plan ahead to better serve all students in our state. Thank you. Okay, for the business of the agenda. Guthrie, let's go ahead with roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. I will now call roll. Sandy Rowe.
Present.
Greg Heyman.
Present.
Rukaya Adams. Natalie Arnott.
Present.
Present.
Richard Devlin.
Present.
Ellen Coker. Teresa Martinez.
Present.
Jen Proctor Andrews.
Present.
Fernando Rojas Galvan. Emily Simnett.
Present.
Mochi Thomas Apelli. Gail Yamasaki.
Present.
That is roll, Chair, and we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Also, we have for the first time with us physically, Jen Proctor Andrews. Welcome. Andrews, I'm sorry. Welcome. We're very glad to see you in person. Seen you on the phone, we've seen you on Zoom. Would you share a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, Gala na luwa maka ni Jill, Jen Proctor Andrews and Son. Kukwel ka u halkaima da mikam ish the son. Good morning, it's really great to see you all. My name is Jen Proctor Andrews. I'm a Coquel person and my family is the Mikam family. I come to the HECC through my past work as the higher education coordinator for the Coquel Indian tribe. which is my tribe in Southern Oregon. Well, I live in Portland and I grew up in Salem. And so I also went to school in Salem and Seattle. So I have, I think, a pretty wide lived experience of the Northwest and family roots in the state of Oregon. Let's see, I'm vice chair of the Coquille tribe, so I do a lot of work in the legislature on the state and federal level, and really advocating for tribal sovereignty and uplifting our community in any way possible. And that work includes a lot of activity in rural Oregon, of course. So I kind of come at this work with that perspective. I also used to be a small business owner, and I really enjoyed that quite immensely. The freedom it brought, and also have a 5-year-old son, and my husband is an early childhood behavior specialist. And my mother also was a director of our tribe's education department, so I'm kind of steeped in it. There was no escape for me. And I'm just super happy to be here finally and feeling healthy and excited. And it's a beautiful day. So thank you for welcoming.
Welcome, we're so glad to have you here. Is the, do you call the Coquille language, what's its name? Is it Coquille?
That's a good question. We actually traditionally would have spoken, the women at least would have spoken at least 3 or 4 languages. We have 2 at least languages in our small tribe, in our small little area. And one of them is Mila, which I was speaking, and that is the main language my family would have spoken. No, the women when married out learned the languages of the village they married into. And so we also have a lot of Niuea speakers, which is a dialect of Athabascan.
Wow.
Yeah, and this is actually one of my passions. I started learning during the pandemic when there was an instructor who put lessons online because she lives in Eugene and teaches out of Eugene. And we actually share this language with our neighbor tribe, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. So it's the Coos group of that tribe who we share this language with. I'm one of probably 5 people who at least know off the top of their head kind of how to speak a little bit. We have our last fluent speaker passed away in 1939. And so I'm a big advocate for learning, and in my higher education experience, Millet was a part of bringing that into my degree. And so that's going to be a little bit of my focus here too, is allowing our students to be able to be credentialed for that knowledge. I still continue to learn on Tuesday evenings, and then I teach a group of children online on Sunday mornings. And that's a lot of fun where my husband helps with his early childhood experience, and through the pandemic, he learned how to teach, teach is loosely used, but have time with preschool age children online. And so we use a lot of those tools like memory games and things too. And then when these children come together at our community gatherings, they all know each other and recognize each other. They can speak together, and most of our elders don't even know, didn't get a chance to learn the language because of their cultural experiences. It's just a lot of fun. That really brings me a lot of joy.
Thanks for sharing all of that with us, and we really look forward to benefiting from all of your experiences and history and background. Really have checked a whole lot of bases. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Okay, let's see. Next order of business, we're going to move to minutes. Everyone read the minutes? Anybody have any corrections or questions? Motion to approve, please.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? No. Minutes passed. Thank you.
I would formally abstain, so I would say.
Okay, I think it's you, Ben.
Yeah, great. Well, I will give a brief report. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate that so many of you could make it to Salem today, and we'll have a vote option through the afternoon as well for those who are not able to be here in person. I'll cover a few items, some of which you've seen via email over the last month, but I want to sort of get them here on the record. First, really to acknowledge where we are in the FAFSA season. So this has been something we've talked about at the commission. You've seen in headlines, it has been a challenging year for Americans seeking to access federal and state financial aid through that newly updated FAFSA. Won't get into all of the issues that accompanied the rollout of that and still affect students' ability to successfully complete that form. It is getting better. I can say that quite confidently that today most applicants can, through the federal student aid portal, complete that application, get their contributors if they have them, complete the application, and federal student aid is processing those applications and generating the student aid index that we and colleges and universities use to administer awards. That is now happening on a regular and fairly smooth basis for most students. That being said, FAFSA numbers, FAFSA completions remain down this year and significantly down in ways that are concerning to us and to our institutional partners and to colleges and universities and higher education officials all over the country. So year over year, if you were to compare the end of April 2024 with the end of April 2023, the number of Oregonians who have successfully completed a FAFSA is down about 16%. We keep in mind the HECC gets copies of all of those FAFSAs completed by Oregonians because that's how we process state financial aid for those who are eligible. If you look just at high school seniors, the part of the potentially new higher education, population, they're also down in that a little more, down about 20% year over year. That both of those figures, that down 16, down 20%, is actually slightly better than the national average. So we're not down as much as most states. So we can maybe take a little bit of solace in that. That being said, Oregon's FAFSA completion rates were not very high to begin with. So I don't want to emphasize too much silver on that lining. So a lot of work to do. We are, the HECC, along with our partners at the Oregon Department of Education, the staff in the HECC's Office of Student Access and Completion are working hard, both in targeted and general ways to get the word out, to support students and schools in their efforts to complete FAFSA. So that's included some very direct messaging from the State Department of Ed and the HECC to K-12 leaders, to high school counselors, administrators, others, connecting them with resources, with information, with some of the workarounds, so that they can better enable students to complete. We've also been putting out the message more broadly to partners around the state. We'll have a message go out. If it didn't go out yesterday, then likely today to legislators to enlist their effort in getting the word out about the kind of information and options for students to complete the FAFSA. I will emphasize a lot of the work that we do, especially individual work that the HECC does to support student FAFSA completion is through our OSAC's work and the SPIRE program, this mentoring program that we administer that takes advantage of, supports community mentors who are connected directly with high school students. Our FAFSA Plus program, where we are providing individual level information to participating high schools and community-based organizations so they know directly which of their students individually have completed or not and can target their own outreach and support efforts. And as I said, we're connecting all of those partners with information, resources, and fielding calls. So pleased to say we are, as of several weeks ago, we are actually using FAFSA data to administer awards, to issue awards qualifying students, the Oregon Opportunity Grant, the Oregon Promise. As I was pleased to share with you by email several weeks ago, we recalculated based on updated projections and new data, the Oregon Opportunity awarding table for the upcoming 2024-2025 school year. And we are issuing awards to students with student aid indexes as high as 8,000, which when I spoke to you about this at the last meeting, I said I didn't think we would be able to do, that there would be a sizable category of students in that sort of somewhat higher income level who would not be eligible for an opportunity grant award. We now believe that we can continue to serve students with EFCs, and we are serving students with EFCs up to 8,000. Those are smaller awards than a student who qualifies with that very low SAI, so EFC, very low SAI at 0 or negative, but nevertheless, we are providing state aid all the way through that sort of low middle income student. The Oregon Promise, I want to note, and probably more information to come about this. It's been a really strong year for Oregon Promise applications. This is the program that, as you know, provides graduating high school students with free community college or near free community college, assuming they enroll directly upon or close to directly upon high school completion or GED completion. And it does require a separate application along with completing the FAFSA, or of course for us to administer this. And that application has been coming in at near record levels. That does raise the possibility that we will have to put a limit, a cap on the students that we serve. And the way the law allows us to do that is basically for the highest income students. So that cap sort of doesn't support the very highest income students. We are assessing currently whether that will be necessary this year for the first time, I think, 4 or 5 years that we've had to do that based on our budget restrictions. Shifting gears slightly to some of the information I sent last night. I just noted for you, if you haven't seen it yet in your email, that yesterday the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association released its annual report on state higher education finance. A few highlights from that are that that report, which compares Oregon enrollment and public financing and tuition revenue with the other 49 states, shows, I think, much of what we sort of have understood to be true, but it's worth reinforcing. First off, that enrollment declines here over the past 5 to 10 years have been considerably higher than the national average. Secondly, that our total public investment in higher education on a per student basis is considerably less than the national average. So despite large increases over the past decade, 75% increases over the past decade, we continue to rank well below the national average, and in this updated report are 37th in the country on that measure. We've seen real gains in financial aid, growing that investment per student by 159% since 2013, but again, still lagging the national average, not by as much, but still somewhat behind. And I point out the comparison with the state of Washington, which invests more than twice as much per student. Net tuition revenues, the revenue that our institutions realize per student, adjusted for inflation, has increased about 23% over the last decade. That is quite a bit higher than the national increase. That net tuition revenue that is greater than the national average helps offset the very low level of state and public investment. So when you combine those measures to look at total institutional revenue per student, you're about in the middle, but it's on the backs of students disproportionately compared to most other states. There's more information there. It's in the email, and please feel free to check out the report. It's really terrific. Final thing that I'll mention is that yesterday, and our guest from the governor's office may speak to this, but I will note that yesterday the governor announced that her submitted her nominations for appointments to boards and commissions. This happens on a regular basis. It's how all of you got here, of course. And the seat that Aislinn Matthias, who many of you knew as a commissioner, held, has been vacant since Aislinn's resignation in December as a result of her taking a new job. That's a position that's dedicated to a staff member from a community college or university. And yesterday, the governor announced her nomination of Jennifer Smith for that position. So Jennifer will be up for Senate confirmation later this month. I think I have that right. And assuming she's confirmed, she'll start at the HECC as early as June. Look forward to welcoming Jennifer and learning more about her. Then she, like Emily, is an employee of the University of Oregon. So you may be joined by a second
Interesting.
person from.
There you go.
And that is my report.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, now we're, monthly, do you need to say anything?
I will note, as usual, your packets contain a monthly budget update that shows HECC spending against its current biennial budget. And if you have questions about that, feel free to let me or our operations director comprehend.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to welcome Morgan Gratz-Weiser. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, good morning.
Devlin.
Richard?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner.
yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. I'll promise Ms. Gratz-Weiser this will be the last time I will embarrass her before anybody. I've known her since 2016 when I hired her to be my senior legislative assistant, and she turned out to be one of my best, and neither one of us knew at that time that I would be leaving the Senate at the end of 2017. When I left, she became a staff member and advisor to the Senate Democratic Caucus. Soon after that, I believe she became the legislative director for the Oregon Environmental Council. After that, she became a natural resources advisor to Governor Brown, and now she is the deputy legislative director for Governor Kotek. She's had a very good 8 years, and I'm expecting a lot more out of her. And so I'll turn it back over to you, Madam Chair. This is Ms. Morgan Gratz-Weiser.
Thank you very much. Thank you for introducing her and welcome. That's quite, now you got to live up to your introduction.
Thank you, Richard. That's really kind. And good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me this morning. I am Morgan Gratz-Weiser. I serve as Deputy Legislative Director for Governor Kotek. And today, and for a little bit of time here, I'm serving as the Interim Advisor for HECC, as Vince Porter has stepped into a new role as Deputy Chief for Public Administration in our office, and we will be hiring for a new Workforce, Employment, and Higher Education Policy Advisor. So I'm here to support the HECC through our budget and policy development process this spring and summer. But I will be very clear that I'm not the policy expert in the same way that Vince is or whoever our new hire will be. But I really appreciate Director Cannon inviting me to join you this morning to share an update from the governor's office. And I'll just kind of share a few remarks and then happy to just have any questions. So I'll just start with kind of reframing. The governor has been focused during her first year on her initiative priorities of addressing housing and homelessness and shelter needs, behavioral health and addiction services, and education, specifically with a focus on early literacy, summer learning opportunities, and supports for our youngest learners. Also in her first year, the governor completed her One Oregon tour, in which she visited every county in the state, meeting with nearly 1,000 different Oregonians to listen and learn about key issues in their communities and to talk about and tour different housing, behavioral health, and early learning projects and programs. She did also visit a number of higher education institutions as part of this tour, and I know she deeply appreciated the workforce and career readiness programming that is happening across the state at those many institutions. Just to look back briefly at the 2024 session, the governor did stay mission focused on housing. She just introduced one bill, House Bill 1537, which served as a housing production and accountability bill and became part of a broader housing package. She also led on what became a $30 million investment in summer learning programming, which also included a directive for additional planning and coordination this coming summer so that we can have a more robust summer learning program coming into 2025. Looking ahead, the governor is staying very clearly focused on her 3 priority areas and has directed agencies to support this work where there is alignment and to also prioritize good governance and enhanced customer service as key foundational components to the work across the enterprise. And then we will also be leaning in on wildfire response and recovery, public safety, and continuing to boost the state's ongoing climate efforts. So with this kind of continued focus in mind, we have slightly shifted the budget development and legislative concept development process for the 2025-27 just process through the executive branch, really with a goal of enhanced collaboration. And so going back to December, the governor sent out guidance to agencies asking that on the front end, really, that for us to start in January, we asked agencies to submit a rough list of draft legislative concepts and policy option package ideas for our 2025 consideration. It really was to get a first look at what folks could be interested in across the enterprise. The governor's office and chief financial office, we received approximately over 600 legislative concepts and over 1,100 POP proposals. So there's broad and far-reaching ideas here. Again, this was kind of a catch-all process to see what folks are interested in. And we're now working collaboratively to refine that list together with the chief financial office in partnership with our agencies. The challenge that we're looking at is, as well, based on our February economic forecast, the chief financial office anticipates that there will be pretty limited revenue growth above current service level. And so we are asking agencies to review their list of POP ideas and prioritize based on a 1% to 2% growth target, depending on the agency. This target applies to general fund and discretionary lottery funds. And I will just add here that DAS is currently calculating the public university and community college CSL information, and they will share that when that is complete. And that POP proposals associated with the public universities and community colleges may be considered outside of HECC's 1% target. So that's still in discussion. Over these next 6 weeks, we will be reviewing all of the legislative concepts and the POPs. We have a June 28th deadline for submitting legislative concepts to the Office of Legislative Counsel for drafting, and budget materials are due to DAS at the same time. So we have a lot of work to do in the next 6 weeks. Our office is in close discussion with the chief financial office, and we will be in conversation back and forth with agencies so that we can appropriately prioritize and refine the lists of legislative concepts and POPs. I'm just going to share in closing that we really appreciate everyone's patience and collaboration. This is a new process. The goal is truly to figure out how to best leverage limited state resources in the best way. And we fully acknowledge that it's always challenging when processes change, but the goal truly here is to have an enhanced collaboration throughout the entire process. So it's not seen as agencies just submitting a whole lot of ideas and then the governor's office and CFO just making decisions based on what the governor's budget will be without additional conversation. So I'll pause there. Happy to take questions to the best of what I know, and we can certainly follow up if there's items I'm not familiar with.
Questions? Anybody?
I'll let her off today, Madam Chair.
He'll call me later.
Well, you'll get an email. Two things. Do you have, does the governor have a timetable for hiring a new education aide?
I don't think we have a specific timeline yet. We have just we've had some staff transitions in the last couple of weeks. And so it's just been in the last probably 2 to 3 weeks that I've stepped into this role here. So I think we will be posting for that role shortly. And so my hope is in the next couple of weeks, possibly a month or 2.
Okay. Thank you very much for stepping into that role. We're pleased to have you. And thank you. It's encouraging to hear that you were discussing moving the university requests and POPs that are really needed there and potentially additional student aid out of the regular process. we will give you all the evidence you need on why you should do that. And how it's best for Oregon's future and workforce development and everything that the governor has as part of her top priorities. So thank you for considering that. We really, really do appreciate it. And commissioners, you saw that you'll have the explanation of the POPs in our legislative agenda, Kyle Thomas's report later on our agenda. So, okay, thanks for being here. Hope you can stay for a while.
Thank you for having me.
Now we have the public testimony. And it looks like we have Southern Oregon University. Rick Bailey, welcome. Thank you for coming out, please. Your show.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Heyman, Director Cannon, Commissioners. So honored to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. We have an item in your packet that is a proposal that our Board of Trustees is considering. They've been thinking about this for a few months. They'll be voting on it next month, but it completely changes our student fee structure in an exciting way and really helps us to adapt to how students are behaving. The two architects are geniuses, so I don't say that lightly. They are joining us online, and I'm so excited to be able to celebrate them and their work with you. And that is Josh Lovern, our Director of Budget, and Dr. Matt Stillman, our AVP for Enrollment Services. And they're here to share the ideas. So, gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, President Bailey. Thank you, Commissioners. Thank you, Chair Rowe.
Awesome.
Can you hear me okay?
You introduce yourself for the record. For commissioners who got that.
So this is the second time I should have gotten this by now. I'm so sorry. I'm Rick Bailey. I'm the president at Southern Oregon University. I've been there almost 2.5 years, and every day's been a gift. So thanks.
To the university, certainly.
No.
Thank you.
Okay, Josh, Matt, over to you guys.
Thank you, President Bailey. Thank you, Chair Rowe. Thank you, Commissioners. For the record, I'm Josh Lovern, Director of Budget and Planning at Southern Oregon University. Our Board of Trustees and President Bailey are keeping concerns about access, equity, and affordability at the forefront of campus conversations. With this new fee assessment approach that you have in your packet, we believe we've developed a way to kind of chip away at some of these issues. Among several benefits we've identified, the assessment proposal you'll see in the handout offers more affordable access for non-traditional students, ensures fee equity regardless of course modality, and actually reduces fee charges for students taking a mix of online and face-to-face courses. That's a behavior we're projecting continued growth in, especially in our post-COVID world. If approved by our board, this assessment methodology will replace our outdated fee structure, the assessment structure, with a fairer, clearer system. Dr. Stillman.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, President Bailey and Commissioners. We appreciate the opportunity to chat with you. I just want to add a couple of other potential advantages that we are very much anticipating. First one of which is the current way that we are assessing fees at Southern intentionally front loads that first credit hour at a significant level. So for example, it currently costs over $500 in mandatory fees to take a 1 credit hour PE course, right? We absolutely know that we have no market share for a low credit entry sort of variable with how we're currently doing things. By thresholding our fees significantly differently, we're hoping to gain market share and really explore opportunities for community development, for engaging in things like second languages for community members, et cetera. We feel like we have a huge opportunity to explore those permutations, which, as Josh mentioned, really will impact our ability to engage with non-traditional student populations. The other big advantage that we're seeing with this proposal is that it frankly simplifies our processes and our billing. Right now, there are candidly only a handful of people on campus that can truly walk a student through all of the levels of detail on how fees work. And Josh and I are 2 of those people. So we're really hopeful that by collapsing fees together, making things much more streamlined, students are going to understand what they're paying for in a lot better sense. We're going to have much more engaged conversations with them, as well as parents and other stakeholders. And the transparency element of how we're assessing mandatory fees becomes significantly enhanced as a result of doing so. So I will defer to President Bailey for any additional comments or thoughts he might have.
Madam Chair, you can clearly see members of the commission that they are the brains of the operation here. We're really, really proud of them and the work that they're doing. As I said, the board is going to consider this on June 21st. We're happy to share this in a more detailed way if you'd like afterwards, because we know this is just public comment, but thank you so much for giving us a moment to share.
Well, thank you for sharing, coming up to do that.
Thank you,
Commissioner.
thank you, Chair Rowe. Just a couple questions. One, I love models that simplify, so I like this a lot. But two questions. One, are your mandatory fees revenues specific to a purpose, or are they absorbed into the general resources? And two, do you have a calculation of what the net impact on your revenue as an institution will be through this change?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Hammond. Let me answer the second question first, if I may, and I'll ask the guys to weigh in. I challenged them to come up with something that was cost and revenue neutral as much as we could. And they're very humble about this, but they ran hundreds, not exaggerating, hundreds of permutations to try to figure out how to kind of hit that sweet spot. Let me also say that we are basing that based on what our student behavior in certain modalities for the last 2 years. We've just been able to validate that with the last fall term. So we think that we have a pretty good model here that we can bring to the board. But let me turn to the guys to answer Vice Chair Hagan's first question.
You want to take that, Rose?
Yeah, the way that the Vice Chair, the way that the structure will work will ensure that those areas on campus that are sort of funded by the fee will maintain their proportional scale of the fee when we go to a single fee concept. Okay, so they'll still be getting the revenue, and then it scales up. In terms of the overall revenue projection, it is looking like our current system is a closed mathematical system, right? It's a schedule. And so in order to make sure that we keep that schedule funded, some of the fee will be looking like it's growing a little bit of revenue, but it's really only because of a shift of incorporating some of our online population into a fee schedule that didn't exist prior to now. Basically, the online fee was external to our regular mandatory incidental and enrollment fees, and now we're incorporating it all together. And so by nature, you're going to generate a little bit more revenue.
If I'm going to close this up, Vice Chair, it's all, and I'll put it in a way that I can understand it. It's almost like and it's no one's fault, but it's like we were still using a 20th century model for how we were assessing fees. And we kind of made assumptions that students were either going to be in fully online or they're going to be, well, students aren't behaving like that anymore. And so we were in some ways punishing students for multimodal approaches, which is how a lot of students are behaving.
I appreciate that. It's helpful to just know that your goal is to be revenue neutral.
Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. What is 4 face-to-face? What does that mean? 4 credits online plus 4 face-to-face? What does that mean?
Thanks, Commissioner. So in a way, it's part of the answer to Vice Chair Hagan's question. So if a lot of our courses, for example, are 4 credit hours per the course. So when you see that, it means students are taking 4 credit hours face-to-face, and they're taking 8 credit hours online, or 4 and 12. And it's that combination that a lot of our students fit into. But in many ways, our old fee structure was kind of pricing them out.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much again for coming. We'll be very interested in the results. We'll assume it passes. And if there are lessons to be learned more widely, sort of what result you see a couple of years down the road, and any learnings we can glean from that.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have John Wyckoff from the Oregon Community College Association. John, are you online?
I am. Can you hear me? Can folks hear me all right?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you. Chair, members of the commission, John Wyckoff with the Oregon Community College Association. Sorry I couldn't be with you in person today. I just wanted to make a few quick points. We appreciated the opportunity to present before the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee yesterday, and I just wanted to summarize a little bit of what we talked about, just a little bit of it, yesterday. And part of what we talked about with the F&A committee was 2 years ago when we came to the F&A committee and then to the HECC, we were at sort of the nadir of our enrollment during the pandemic, had hit kind of a low point in enrollment to about a head count of 178.5 thousand FTE. And I think, and at the time we talked about wanting to try to find a balance between making responsible reductions based on what had happened with enrollment while trying to maintain some capacity for when hopefully students would start to come back as the pandemic stopped being so much of a disruption. We have in fact seen that in the 2 years, the two intervening academic years since the low point of the pandemic. We've come up 10% in FTE enrollment. We think we're on similar track for this academic year. What has come back more slowly is our FTE enrollment. So we have more students, but they're taking fewer credits. We do think this year, and what we're seeing, that students might be that FTE is also picking up, so that while it was a bit of a lagging indicator, it is also picking up. So we're seeing students coming back taking more courses as well. One of the other things that we're seeing is we are seeing different types of students wanting different types of services. I think the universities are seeing this too. We're seeing more demand for short-term career certificates and more demand for those CTE courses. That is in many ways good news. Fiscally, it's not the best news, and that those are our most expensive courses. But those are also our career-oriented courses that often lead to higher salaries. So it is very good news for students, but it does create fiscal pressure for the institutions. That leads to our current service level request, which we use a model that we work with the HECC and Department of Administrative Services and Legislative Fiscal Office. Our numbers, we think of it as a true CSL. It captures things that the state CSL doesn't, such as unfunded mandates, the actual cost of healthcare, not the sort of statutory cost of healthcare. And so those are included in what would be a 14.9% increase for the biennium that is really driven by a lot of the inflationary pressures we saw in the last 2 years, particularly in some of the urban areas where there were some fairly significant salary contract increases based on prices of housing and living expenses. PCC, for example, they talked about yesterday, saw a 22% increase in their energy costs over the last 2 years. So really the current service level is just trying to capture those costs. And then we also include in our current service level unfunded mandates, which the Department of Administrative Services and Legislative Fiscal Office do not. They look at those as a policy choice by the legislature that the colleges and universities are supposed to pick up the cost. We try to include those in our current service level calculation just so that we're being transparent about what the actual costs are. Very quickly, I just wanted to point to a few of the POPs, the policy option packages that we are bringing forward, particularly the ones that I think have a real equity impact. The first is our co-requisite work group, is some funding for the co-requisite work group. This is ongoing work that we're working collaboratively with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission on. We really appreciate this collaboration to try to move from a traditional developmental education model for students who don't test into college level coursework. And this puts them in a co-requisite model that more or less triples the success rates for students when they're taking these pre-collegiate level courses. The next is for a little bit of funding to start more applied baccalaureate programs across the state. We really see this as an entry point for students who wouldn't otherwise be served by higher education. They're more likely to be working adults. They're more likely to be parents. They're more likely to be students of color. If you look nationally, it really is often a different population than traditional universities are serving. And we think this creates a real equity opening for students across the state, particularly in parts of the state that are not necessarily well served. We also have a policy option package around adult reconnect. I always think it's kind of an interesting statistic that the largest cohort of learners in Oregon are those with some college, no degree. And we really see that as some of the low-hanging fruit, to the degree that there is low-hanging fruit in education, of trying to get those folks back in, reconnected, and get to a certificate or degree, because they have already put in some of that work and often taken out debt to do so. And if you could just kind of get them to that finish line. And then last, while we don't have anything yet, we are working with the universities on a behavioral health initiative that I think that we hope to bring into session, but that we're still in the process of working together on, that I think would increase kind of capacity in the pipeline to get to create behavioral health professionals across the state. And then last, I just wanted to say, even though we do not yet have an ask around the Oregon Opportunity Grant, we will, as we always do, prioritize the Opportunity Grant. We just have not yet have concluded the process of what we think that ask should entail. But as last time, it will be an aggressive ask. I think that is an area where we've made progress, but still have more progress to make. And we remain strongly committed to the Oregon Opportunity Grant, even though, as you know, because we have come before you, that we do think there need to be some changes around the way the grant is administered, and we have been involved in that process. And I think that there are some changes that are probably going to occur. So more to come on that. But just wanted to point out, even though we didn't bring it up yesterday, we remain strongly committed to growing that program and to as one of the best ways to create access for students. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions? You crammed a lot into a little bit more. But you didn't take a breath, so there was no way to interrupt you, so it's good. It's all good. I have a question. Do you have now, or can you develop, as you're going back to students who did not get degreed or certified, but who have invested in college? I'm looking at some point for a set of best practices on how to do that and extracted learnings from that, either somewhere along the way or certainly once you see some results. And I don't have a good sense of that nationally either. So if there's a way of really developing, including borrowing from other states, the best practices, those, of course, are the students we all know where their investment has not been worth it. And so we're very encouraged that you're doing it, but I also want to see, is there a way of proceeding that makes the most sense and produces success? And if so, what is HECC's role in supporting that?
And I think, like, in some ways, the co-requisite work group's a really good model, because the director of our Student Success Center is working, with CCWD collaboratively to look at national best practices, and we've gone through a process doing that. So I think that's probably a really good model for this work. And I'm not the person that follows those best practices. Elizabeth Cox-Brand in our office is. But I think that would very much be the intention. And again, I think that the work we're doing around the co-requisite work is a very good collaborative model.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Devlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. Later this month, the legislature will have its legislative days, and the House and Senate Revenue Committee, along with the governor, will receive the May forecast. As you know, the May forecast is perhaps one of the more accurate forecasts because it actually has the data from all the returns that have come in. Are you hearing anything in advance of any surprises or?
I haven't heard any more than what you heard from the governor's office this morning, that that it may be a little more tepid than what we've seen in the past, but I don't probably have any information that you don't at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, now we are on to the consent agenda. Oh, no other public testimony?
None.
That's not signed up in advance. Okay. We're on to the consent agenda, and we have, I believe, 4 program approvals from the community colleges. Is there a motion to approve?
So
So-
moved, Madam.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. It's interesting, especially for newer members, the amount of, at some point, make sure you check the process, the amount of work that goes into it before these proposals get to us. So that's why we can put them on the consent agenda, because our staff and the universities and colleges that propose these really have months and months of work and digging into it, so. And now I'll talk is legislative update. Now we get our hops. Thinking about our first 3 or 4 meetings 5 years ago, I realized I had to lean over to the next person and say, what's
I will do my best to define it. Good morning. Good morning, Chair Rowe, members of the Commission, Kyle Thomas, Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs at the HECC. Tom Reel is also here, hopefully online. He's out of state. So I'll lead this update, and if there are any questions that I can't answer, hopefully Tom will pop on behind me and do his best to assist. So we've been a little bit quieter than usual about it, but over the last several months, we've been working through the process of beginning to develop the agency recommended budget, which is due in August. So a quick primer, this is the document that the agency submits to the Department of Administrative Services. It serves as our formal recommendation to the governor for spending levels for the next 2 fiscal years following the year of submission. So for this cycle, this is the recommended budget that will cover July 125 through June 30th, 2027. The state practices what's called current service level budgeting, and DAS defines the current service level as the calculated cost of continuing only the current legislatively approved programs into future biennia. For the upcoming biennium, current service level begins with the current legislatively adopted budget. Added to that total is any emergency board actions that are taken up through this month, any program phase-ins, any mandatory caseload increases, and other cost increases such as inflation. And subtracted from that is one-time costs, programs that are phased out, and pilot programs. And so what this means in practice is that the focus of the budget exercise is on proposed changes to that CSL level, and those changes are policy option packages. Along with this, we've been developing legislative concepts, some of which are tied to draft budget recommendations and some are not. These finalized legislative concepts proposals are due at the end of the year, although you heard Morgan say, practically speaking, they're finalized in the summer to allow legislative council to draft them into statutory language. The vision, the process, and the timings for how we do this are subject to the direction of the governor's office and thus tend to shift a little bit as administrations change. This is Governor Kotek's first full budget and policy development cycle, and HECC has been responding to the governor's vision and parameters for how we go about this work. For this cycle, which is a departure from recent history, the governor has asked agencies to be pretty judicious at the onset of the budget process. This is primarily for 2 reasons. First, the governor has well-established continuing priorities in the areas of primary and secondary education, behavioral health, and housing, where programming and spending increases continue to be most likely. And second, early projections on anticipated state revenues and expenses for the upcoming biennium indicate there's not an abundance of revenue anticipated above and beyond the state's current service expenditure level. Commissioner Devlin, while that might change with the May forecast, I also don't have any additional information or insight to share. This direction is formalized by caps on agency requests, and HECC is subject to a 1% cap on requests for new funding, or slightly above $31 million above its current service level. This is, of course, really challenging for agencies across the state enterprise. However, for HECC, there are 2 main issues that are perhaps somewhat different than what some other agencies might experience. First, the CSL level does not capture 2 different types of cost increases that are nonetheless real and require consideration within the budget making process. The first of these is that the true cost of on institutions to maintain current services is above and beyond how the state calculates these costs, which pretty much automatically results in the need for a sizable budget request just to maintain operations without larger service and tuition adjustments. And second, the cost of financial aid programs is affected by student enrollments, institutional tuition and fee increases, cost of attendance factors like housing, and this year, major alterations in the calculation of student need under the new FAFSA formula. And these factors aren't automatically rolled into current service level because student financial aid is not a mandatory expenditure program, and that it's not an entitlement program. Another challenge relates to the statutory responsibility of the commission to receive funding requests from public institutions and to recommend to the governor a consolidated higher education agency request budget aligned with the agency's strategic plan, one that follows a determination of the costs necessary to provide quality post-secondary education, and also following a public input process. So this process and analysis would invariably result in a budget request exceeding the $31 million cap. So there are two sets of directives on the commission: the budget guidance issued by the governor and the statutory requirement to receive budget requests and recommend a budget aligned with the strategic plan. And there are items such as the public institutional support funds, the opportunity grant, where the official CSL calculation does not adequately capture the cost of growth. You just heard Morgan indicate the potential for the differential treatment of those items outside of the agency cap, which is wonderful considering each of them alone would exceed that cap. There are also some draft proposals that we have to tie into the governor's priority areas. It remains to be seen how exactly those items would be considered relative to the cap. And finally, because the direction that was provided to agencies not to publicize early work on budget and policy priorities, HECC's budget and legislative packages remain in need of the benefits of partner engagement. And a lot of these items remain placeholders pending further discussion. And so staff are open to replacing, modifying, withdrawing draft budget and policy recommendations following this and other discussions that will occur in the coming months. Before I go down the list of policy option packages and LCs, I just want to see if there are any questions sort of on the process or limitations.
Do you know when the discussion with partners can begin?
Yeah, it varies. The answer is now, the short answer is now. And really the mechanism by which we will engage partners really probably varies depending on the concept or policy option package we're talking about. So you will see, for instance, the item that John Wyckoff just mentioned on co-requisite remediation. There is a statutory work group that is being formed and is about to start meeting, or maybe has started to meet. I'm looking at Donna and see if she's saying if she has her head. Starting to meet on those potential recommendations. So that's going to be the obvious venue and the forum by which that engagement will occur. And there are plenty of items where it's less structured than that. And just depending on the nature of the item, the nature of the constituency groups that are potentially interested, we'll have to sort of form an ad hoc process around that individual.
Okay. Questions on process before Kyle goes through the individual items. Mr. Devlin?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. On the CSL, the F&A committee had the presentations yesterday from the universities and community colleges, amongst others. Focusing on the universities for a moment, it was fairly clear what they thought. They're using a term of base funding level versus CSL, same thing, actually, in a sense. Do we know historically where DAS and actually LFO will differ from their determination of CSL?
Kyle, I think I could take this one. Chair Rowe, Commissioner Devlin, historically, there's been a several percentage difference between DAS's calculated CSL and the universities and the community colleges. It does vary based on various factors, mostly having to do with the PERS account. And we're gonna, so this year, my estimate is we're gonna be about 2 to 3% below the university or the community colleges.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kyle.
Are there any other process questions?
Yes.
Okay. So I will go down the list of policy option packages now. There is probably more detail in the docket item that I will go through verbally, and as we progress through the budgeting process, more detail will be put on each of these items for you as you head towards endorsement or consideration of the agency recommended budget submission. The same thing goes for legislative concepts. I'll probably only talk about each very, very briefly at this stage. But as we head towards the end of the year, those concepts and the information around them get filled out. For the policy option packages, these are listed in a priority order. Support fund investments have been excluded from this list because they are still pending the valuation. And there's sort of no consideration in this prioritization whether something fits within or is outside of the $31 million cap. Those refinements will happen again as we head towards finalization of the ARB and any subsequent communication that the commission may issue to DAS and the governor's office regarding other investments necessary to meet the agency strategic plan. The first POP is the HECC modernization project. This is a project that is underway right now to replace several legacy systems that HECC inherited during the consolidation phase and the joining of several disparate state departments and state offices. The next phase of this project, about 1 million in general fund, 5.8 million in other funds, goes towards project completion, without which there will be several pieces of functionality that ultimately will not make its way into the LEARN system. Just as a reminder, this project focuses on a replacement of financial aid management system, the employee training and provider list, and the system that's used by the Office of Academic Policy and Authorization for management of all of the work, particularly in private institutions that they do. The next POP is Future Ready Oregon and an ARPA reauthorization and continuing workforce investments. This is composed of two components. The first is a reauthorization of the ability of the agency to spend $62.5 million of federal funds as that were initially allocated to the agency as a result of COVID level federal spending. And the second is a $75 million state general fund continuation of programs and priorities under Future Ready Oregon. There is an associated legislative concept here that would make sort of minor changes in the grand scheme of the Future Ready Oregon legislative and statutory authorization that would go in conjunction with this POP, but it's not necessarily tied directly to the POP. Even if the POP was reduced, even if the POP was not advanced by the governor's office or not endorsed by the legislature, we would still proceed with the statutory authorization changes necessary to make, in our view, make the Future Ready program run better, a little bit more equitable. Next POP is for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So this POP seeks to accomplish a couple of things. First is to make up for the phase out of a tax credit auction program that we no longer operate, owing to the fact that that auction program brought in less in revenue than it required in state spending via the tax credits that it issued. So this seeks a general fund replacement of those dollars. And second, the POP also proposes an increase to the Opportunity Grant at the level that the lowest income students will be provided approximately 7% of their cost of attendance. This level of funding would also potentially allow for us to consider professional judgments, which are judgments issued at the campus level for students whose financial circumstances have changed significantly since their time of the filing of the since the time of the information that goes into the FAFSA form. And this would allow us to essentially endorse an adjustment that the campuses believe is necessary to reflect the true financial situation of the student and award them accordingly. And the proposed cost of that is $185 million in general funds. The next POP is for the Early Learning Professionals Grant Program. This is a $5 million POP. The ELPG it has had statutory authorization since 2019, but has never been general funded despite being included in the governor's recommended budget 2 years ago. This is a program that is designed to provide incentive to prospective professionals in the early childhood education space by providing them additional financial aid above and beyond what need-based financial aid program or the Oregon Promise program, should they qualify, would provide in order to offset their cost of education and encourage additional providers to enter the early learning workforce. The next POP, John discussed this item. This is the POP supporting co-requisite remediation. We have a work group that will provide recommendations to HECC by the end of this calendar year about if the state should transition from a prerequisite remedial education system to a statewide co-requisite remedial education model. And this POP would support the potential implementation of those recommendations, likely through the provision of some funds to community colleges to support the change management aspects of making that shift. Next is a POP supporting workforce and education pathways for justice-involved adults. With the current workforce shortage in the state, there's perhaps a missing opportunity here to bring new workers into the workforce. And this POP would support the establishment of two programs. First, it would bring the Oregon WorkSource Oregon centers into correctional institutions, as well as expand a program that's modeled after a Portland State University program called the Higher Education in Prison program. Next, Oregon Teachers Scholars Program. So this POP supports an expansion of resources to support eligibility increases, as well as to make up for a statutory change that was unfunded in the prior session that increased the statutory grant for this program from $10,000 to $12,000. So a portion of this POP is making up for essentially the new CSL cost of the program, as well as providing expanded eligibility. This program is a program that targets linguistically and culturally diverse teacher candidates and attempts to bring more of those candidates into the teacher workforce. Next is grants for college access programs. This is an item that's been in the last couple of budgets as direct line item funding to a subset of organizations who do this kind of work in the state. College Possible is one of them, Avid is one of them, TRIO are types of these programs. This POP supports continuing that funding, but continuing it in a different manner than specific line item funding by establishing a grant program that would both be, that two types of organizations would be eligible for. First is those types of organizations that already have established track records doing this kind of mentorship and college access work. And the second is community-based organizations that have deep roots and deep connections into communities that represent underrepresented students. And it's intended to build their capacity to do mentorship and access work with the populations that they do work with on a regular basis. Related to that is a POP that would increase Aspire capacity. So Aspire is HECC's in-house program that does a lot of mentorship and access work through supporting volunteers who work within high schools and communities to mentor students. We've seen an increase in the number of requests for Aspire services and Aspire connections. And this POP supports the increase in Aspire capacity that would allow us to serve all of those increased requests that we're receiving. Next is a POP on transfer pathways and transfer tools. This is about $5 million. It accomplishes a couple of different things. First, it would support the establishment of a transfer portal, which is a technology-based tool that would allow for greater levels of clarity, both student-facing and institutional-facing, around the establishment of these pathways, what they mean for students, how students can get on the right track, how institutions can appropriately sort of codify and maintain the pathways on the back end. It also, aside from that, it also supports increase in the amount of effort that we're able to put towards this work, both through funding HECC for increased positions, but also funding institutions for a small level of release time so that they can dedicate more time and attention to this work. The next POP is to expand OLDC, Oregon Longitudinal Data Collaborative Capacity. So this is a multi-agency collaborative project that connects the education and workforce agencies and data systems across the state to do the kind of longitudinal research that up until a few years ago, the state really did not have the technology or capacity to do. The current sort of project request workload that OLDC is faced with exceeds the amount of research capability that it has, and this POP would support the expansion to match that workload. Just a few more. Next POP is on enhancing customer service to students, institutions, employers, and Oregonians. So this is a series of sort of small, not necessarily related investments across agency functions that supports the addition of 8 positions across the agency, primarily to assist in meeting current statutory audit and policymaking needs. We typically run a POP very, very similar to this every year that just seeks to add the handful of positions that are required to meet the changing workload and changing priorities the agency experiences over the course of the biennium. Tribal workforce development. So this is a $5 million potential grant program that would establish a tribal government specific workforce development funding stream, supporting grant opportunities that are managed by an in-house tribal workforce liaison that will directly engage tribes on workforce development issues. And then lastly, there's the Oregon Future Educators grant program. You heard just a moment ago about the Teacher Scholars Program for diverse educators. This is a more wide reaching grant program intended to support financial aid opportunities for teacher candidates regardless of their cultural or linguistic background, just to support bringing educators of all types into the teacher workforce. I will take a breath for a second and see if there are questions on POPs.
Yeah, Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. So the number one POP as far as the cost impact would be this Oregon Opportunity Grant Reform. And am I correct in interpreting what you've written here as far as last biennium, it was funded at a level of $40 million, regardless of the funding source, but now this POP is proposing $187 million, is that correct?
I don't know the current service level for the Opportunity Grant Program, Tom might, but this biennium it was about 225.
Over 308 total funds. So yeah, and you know, I realize what may be helpful is a table that expresses this with the current funding level, the current service level funding, and then what's being requested, because it's easy to get lost in all of this. But what we are our current budget, biennial budget, 2023-25, all funds for the Opportunity Grant is a little over $300 million. This and the current service level, so what's sort of built into the upcoming budget is a increase of probably, and Tom may have it, not much, 320, something like that. Actually, I'm going to turn it over to Tom because it's a little more, the current service level is, yeah, Tom, you take it.
Thank you, Chairman Rowe, commissioners, Tom Real, our operations director for HECC. Our CSL going into 25-27 is about 329 million. We will have a $40 million shortfall. While it will be in our budget, we will not have the cash due to the tax credit option sunsetting last biennium. So we're asking for a $40 million in general fund just to make us whole to get CSL. Above that, there's 147 in augmentation that we're looking to for the other improvements to the program.
147. So this is an area where the commission in the past has proposed increases that would exceed the level of increase that you see in the sort of draft staff recommendation. I don't know that 147 million sounds judicious, but this is the application of judiciousness into this process. Whereas, I think all of us in this room recognize that even at $147 million in state general fund increase, there will remain a sizable gap between what the state would be able to provide in financial aid grants and the scope of the need out there.
Mr. Detlef.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. this $40 million revenue source, how many bienniums has that previously been in place where we've utilized it?
Chair Rowe, Commissioner Devlin, it's been for the last 3 bienniums, I believe, is another fund account that was fed every biennium, and when it sunsetted, we used the last of it up, or will use the last of it up in this biennium.
What I'm wondering about, and I know that this will be resisted, but CSL is supposed to be more about expenditure level than actually revenue sources. And I know that DAS and LFO have interpreted this differently for some entities to other when a revenue source has gone away. They've considered the expenditure level to be still the CSL. I don't know if they're just automatically going to be saying that this is not part of CSL, because it would appear to me that the expenditure level hasn't changed. And if you're going to meet CSL, I mean, if we had a revenue source for a function normally, and somehow that revenue source diminished, the CSL would still be based on the expenditure level, not on the revenue sources.
So that is a really important technical observation that I will not give a technical answer to, which is, I think you are correct in that observation. And as far as the way that I think the Office of Student Access and Completion has looked at it, and as part of the way that staff is asking you to look at it, is that these are funds that are today supporting students, the absence of which will cause the agency to be able to award fewer grants. And so whether or not they are included in CSL or ultimately are part of the POP or part of the CSL calculation, I think we're sort of saying on a policy basis, it's less relevant than will we be able to serve those students in the next biennium.
Yeah, but it would be helpful to have them reflected in CSL. I mean, I know that a DAS would automatically, anytime there is a change in the level of federal match rates, they don't reduce the CSL for things that receive significant federal dollars. They just include the normal CSL calculation and do not reflect the reduction in the federal match rate. It just is a signal that the state has to come up with more money.
Correct. And we are putting in our CSL at 329.
Okay.
And we're just noting here that 40 million will be unfunded.
Yeah.
At this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Heyman, did you have a question?
Thanks, Chair Rowe. A couple questions, and I have more detail on the Oregon Opportunity Grant stuff. Funny, I thought that there's one of your POPs calculates the costs down to the dollar, which is not what you do with one of them. The enhancing customer service was pretty. Remind me, I cannot remember funding sources. What does OPF stand for?
So first, to address your observation, yeah, I did simplify all of the rest of it. So
we know something.
It's just an oversight. They all do have more than 2 figures in them. Other funds is OF is other funds.
Okay.
Other funds are sort of other agency transfers into HECC would count as other funds. Anything that is not a state general fund appropriation or a federal fund falls into that other funds category.
Right, especially with regards to your top listed plays a considerable role in the funding. So I was just interested in what that stood for. Questions about again, the Oregon Opportunity Grant and Director Canada. Really appreciate your suggestion on how this information be laid out. I think that will be extremely helpful in guiding this conversation. I understand. Want to put in the context of other information or questions. This morning, then you indicated that the current funding level would allow us to provide Oregon operating grants up to the current 8,000 level. We heard a request from the Oregon University System yesterday that said that their calculations indicate that we need an additional 124 million, I think, to accomplish what you said. And so as we look at this request in more detail, which I think is a really important request, I would appreciate some clarity on sort of where we're at and how much does it actually take to maintain that boarding level up to the age of 8,000, and then sort of asking for perhaps requests on that, sort of categorizing that information based on that.
Yeah, just very quickly, there's been a lot of movement in these numbers and will continue to be in these projections over the next several months at least. And a big part of the reason for that is we are only in the last couple of weeks getting actual FAFSA data with those SAIs produced. So anything that we share with the universities and with the larger community, anything we have shared with them related to projections was simply using estimates, using online tools to try to understand how FAFSAs, if they came in this year the same way they had in prior years, would generate new SAIs. We're getting updated data sort of weekly now with actual student records that will allow us to make much clearer projections related to the ongoing costs of this program if it were to continue to be run the way it is today. Also, to be clear, though, our proposal here, what you see in front of you, and that estimate does attempt to expand the program, right? So the modeling that's the basis for the number that's in your packet for the opportunity grant not only accounts for this $40 million hole and the changes to the awarding, the changes to the computation of SAI, but also, an expansion. Right. Also by expansion, we mean provide larger awards to students, or provide more, go farther up the income ladder, or extend the deadline so we don't have to cut students off. If they've applied later than say August, they will get an award. We could extend that. So the professional judgment item that's noted in the packet. So that's the kind of universe of options for us to expand the program, and then we think we would be able to do it with funding at this level. But that's sort of true, in a sense, true CSL cost. We're still not able to estimate that very well until we get some additional records in this year. Big part of it, going on longer than I intended, but frankly, a big part of what we're concerned about and would have a major impact on that estimate is the number of FAFSAs that actually get completed. I told you in my report this morning, we're down 20%. If that remains the case, well, gosh, the cost of this program, in a sense, diminishes. We certainly hope that does not remain the case, that we make up for that deficit, that we end this FAFSA cycle, the 2024 FAFSA cycle, with a similar number of applicants that we had in 2023.
Really appreciate that. I just wanted to note in relation to the funding and achievement meeting yesterday, almost every one of the presentations we received gave the Oregon Opportunity Grant very high priority in their funding interest. And so that's as good as we can understand this issue and what it is we're trying to accomplish would be very helpful. So I really appreciate that. Work on it.
Good. Thank you. Commissioner Biscoe.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. I just have a really good question if I would like kind of like a cheat sheet for all the acronyms, because I know, speaking from experience of being a new commissioner, it's very hard to keep track of them all, and I want to understand what you're speaking of as you're speaking of it.
So I don't have one that relates to the agency. Related to all the budget terminology, there is a glossary that is actually published by the Department of Administrative Services that has information about the budget terminology that the state uses, and I'm happy to point you to that. But in terms of acronyms for like any of the other sort of acronyms that are internal to the agency, I don't know that we actually have like a defined cheat sheet.
One thing I will, but it's a really important and really good reminder, Commissioner Biscoe. One thing we try to do in the docket items, the materials themselves, is we're not 100% with this, but first references, we do write it out or try to write it out, and then you'll see the acronym, and then we use the acronym subsequently in the document. So at times, you'll be able to go back to the, should be able to go back to the docket item and see, you know, ARB, what was that again? And look at the, towards the beginning, and hopefully the first reference has spelled out the fact that that is the agency recommended budget. One tool.
And some reports that we receive, and I guess we just encourage them that are acronym heavy, they will do a glossary with that particular report. And that's helpful, I think, for staff to remember too. Any other commissioners online have questions for Kyle? Okay, I have a question, Kyle, on the college access programs. With things like Avid, I don't know if there are already existing reports on how successful they are. I know Avid isn't even in that many schools, correct? And so I guess, I don't know if you can answer it now or if it's something in a subsequent meeting, just what we know about their history, what our desire is for expansion of these, and what difference we think it will make, because what you're asking for 5 million, but that's not really going directly to expansion, correct?
So I think that the sort of the most self-evident piece of data on whether or not there needs to be more access and membership-oriented programs is probably just the college going rates in Oregon generally, right? They suggest that there is more work to do to socialize the idea of college amongst a broader population of students and prepare them to engage in that process. As for these 8 entities, because the prior state funding has been direct and pass through, we have not managed it like a traditional grant program where we would have criteria and our signed agreement and reporting requirements. However, in 2020, the state legislature did pass a budget note that required us to collect some of this information. I am a tad embarrassed to say that we did not provide that information. That was passed right before the pandemic, and it probably got swamped in a bunch of other business. That is an excuse, but a bad one. We should have done it. But we are in the process now of meeting the requirement of that budget note and going out to Avid and College Possible and the other programs and gathering their data on program utilization and program success as best as we can define that. In support, hopefully, first off, in response to a recent request we received from the legislature, but also hopefully in support of demonstrating that there is more that these programs can do with expanded funding and with expanded reach into community-based organizations that deal with poverty.
And would it be appropriate to include clear recommendations as part of that report? I hear you saying that in support of, we could say, but I guess I'm wondering if we can kind of put the two together and make a case at the same time.
Yeah, yes, is the short answer to your question is yes. And I think that we have learned from LFO that part of the reason that they're reaching out to us right now and asking us for this information is that there is some appetite within some parts of the legislative community to increase the scope of the funding for these types of organizations. So yes, to the extent that we're able to clearly demonstrate through the data that we collect, there is a need. I think there is an opportunity to provide recommendations related to that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Kyle, anything else you want to share with us?
Well, I have 11 legislative concepts.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were going into those or not. We're hearing them, sir.
And I will be much more brief here because several of them just directly relate to POPs. So yeah, we have 11 legislative concepts this year. Again, the same sort of disclaimer that I applied to POPs applies, which is these are, I think, less socialized at this period in time than they traditionally are. And so they will benefit from increased partner engagement. Most of them exist in this placeholder phase where we're sort of just at the beginning process of filling the meat out on the bones. And so some of these you may see drop off or change as we engage in further discussions, research, engagement with partners. The first is the LC2 that's related to the Oregon Opportunity Grant reform POP. This would do a couple of things. First, there is a statutory structure called the shared responsibility model that kind of exists in the background of our financial aid awarding. But the state does not actually adequately fund for the Oregon opportunity for the shared responsibility model to be executed, and portions of this model, I think, I'll just sort of summarize at the highest possible level, are probably a little bit outdated in terms of what sort of financial aid awarding practices today have evolved into from more equity-oriented perspectives. So this LC would eliminate the shared responsibility model from statute. In lieu of that, we would rely principally on the rules that we are in the process of beginning to develop for the Oregon Opportunity Grant that the Commission will see and likely approve by the end of this calendar year. So that will serve as the structure by which opportunity grants are awarded. In addition, there are a couple of technical adjustments we're seeking to make to the opportunity grant. First, there is a loophole in the tuition equity statute. The tuition equity statute is the statute that provides non-citizen resident Oregonians with the right to receive state financial aid, and it has a list of criteria those students must meet in order to be eligible. Since the time of the passage of that statute, the state has sort of greatly expanded opportunities for non-citizen students to participate in financial aid programs. But for the Oregon Opportunity Grant for a specific class of students, they remain ineligible despite being eligible for all other financial aid programs and despite other categories of non-citizens being broadly eligible. So we're seeking a technical adjustment to bring parity to all classes of non-citizen students and provide them with an opportunity to access the OOG. LC number 2 is the placeholder for co-requisite remediation. So this would be filled out by any recommendations from the co-requisite remediation work group that would require statutory adjustments to fully implement. LC number 3 is the LC for the workforce pathways for justice involved adults. And this would provide the statutory authorization and framework for bringing WorkSource Oregon programs and the higher education and prison program operated by PSU into statewide, into all correctional facilities around the state. LC number 4 would establish a program repository. So this is a database or a repository that would allow for the collection and dissemination of information about program capacity around the state. We collect this information in great part for private institutions that are required to report this information to us. But there are gaps in our understanding, particularly in the public program space. So we today can't sort of immediately answer questions around, say, what is the exact capacity in nursing programs in the state and where is it? This LC would allow us, would mandate that institutions, workforce training programs, and all such programs around the state annually provide us with the kind of information that is required in order for us to build a repository that can answer those types of questions and ideally guide policymaking and appropriations in order to mitigate capacity shortages that may exist in certain workforce and academic areas. LC number 5, college access program grants. This would provide the statutory authorization for us to do the grant making program that I talked about for both college membership programs and community-based organizations. This is one of the few statutes or LCs that is essentially already written. There has been a bill that has been introduced in the last 2 legislative sessions that has not yet been passed, but essentially the partner engagement work and the statutory drafting has been completed, and so this LC would simply reintroduce the bill as it existed when the gavel came down in legislative session in 2024. LC number 6, this is a pure placeholder to establish the Tribal Access and Workforce Development Fund, pending discussions that we have with Oregon-based tribes. LC number 7 is the Future Educators Grant. So this is the last pop I discussed for the $20 million grant program for teachers. This LC would provide the statutory framework for that program. LC number 8, minor and technical revisions. Every year we submit a catch-all bill for just minor changes that don't merit standalone legislation. So office name changes, outdated terminology and references, any organizational issues, small organizational issues, or any change really that has no fiscal or policy impact. And that would bore the legislature to death if we introduced it as one standalone bill. We consolidate all of them within one package. So we're collecting those items now. LC number 9 is for injunctive relief for private career school enforcement. So statutorily, private career schools are required to be licensed here in Oregon, and to be licensed, they have to meet a number of statutory and regulatory criteria. It is sometimes the case that entities operate in violation of those licensure statutes. Oftentimes it's as simple as the entity didn't know that a license was required, and so a notification from us is enough to bring them into compliance, and that's the end of the discussion. Other times, despite us issuing cease and desist notifications to those entities, they continue to operate, and we really have no tools after that in order to bring them into compliance. And so this would allow us to seek injunctive relief to stop those entities from operating outside of the statutory system that we have. LC number 10 is for fee setting authority for the Office of Degree Authorization. So this office regulates the private degree granting schools, so different from the private career schools that I just talked about, but private degree granting schools. The fees for this office receives no general fund support, operates entirely on the fees it collects. Those fees are directly mandated by statute. So we have no ability to move those fees up or down as workload changes, as sort of the number of schools changes in order to meet the mandates that office has. So this would this bill would allow us to set those fees by rule. There is still a lengthy process that ultimately involves legislative codification when we seek to increase fees, but this would sort of allow us to increase the fee first and go to the legislature after the fact and seek approval of that increase versus what we have to do now, which is introduce legislation before we can alter those fees. As part of this, we're not necessarily seeking to alter the fee schedule, just get the ability to alter the fee schedule in the future. And then last is related to the Future Ready Oregon $75 million general fund, $62.5 million other fund pop I discussed earlier, would provide some more modest statutory improvements and authorizations to the operation of that program.
Thank you, sir. Any final questions for Cal?
A quick question.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Will number 4, the repository, include the information about the cost of attendance?
So it's not written yet. My inclination is that it will not necessarily include that information. However, we have cost of attendance information, which is already required to be published by institutions as part of their federal requirements to receive federal financial aid. So that information is already available in a different form that would exist outside of the repository.
Is there a reason why it won't be included there in one place?
Commissioner Proctor Andrews, I can't answer that question with certainty. So first, let me state that this is a placeholder pop, so it has, or LC, so it has not been written. I honestly don't know that affirmative consideration has been given to that specific idea that you've raised, but Amy Cox is sitting right behind you, and her ears have perked up. And so I'm sure that is a conversation that she and I will have at some point in the near future.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much, Cal. We appreciate all this. One more of your busy seasons. Fortify yourself, sir. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, 12-minute break. We'll come back at 5 o'clock. Thank you very much.
We're on mute.
Okay, commissioners, we are back in session. And we're moving to the strategic activities, strategic implementation with funding. And the first item is Commissioner Hayman, Vice Chair Hayman, summarizing the meeting yesterday of the FA.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. Yes, the Finance and Funding and Achievement Subcommittee met yesterday. And the dominant activity of our time together is to receive reports from what we call partner perspectives or partners who are in the budget development process. So we heard from the universities, the community colleges, from faculty and staff representation, workforce, and the private in the state. And my sense is it was a very informational time. We've got a chance to look a little more detail on some of the information behind some of the pops that we've just seen from Kyle's presentation. Also, some more detail on the background or the justification for the support funds for the universities and the colleges. And so it's a great time for us to dive into that a little more deeply and help to understand some pretty consistent themes, as I mentioned earlier. It was extremely consistent support for and desire for additional funding for the Oregon Opportunity Grant. Came across quite strong, and then some background on the operational resources necessary for the universities and for the community colleges, which, as we heard, almost always differs from and is as represented by the institutions themselves greater than DAS will calculate. And so for all of us who now know what POPs are, the difference between those two, if requested, goes into a POP as well. So it was really timely to get Kyle's presentation, which sort of brought a lot of what we saw yesterday into a prioritized list as HECC itself is viewing these needs. So I think that's pretty much my report. I think that covers it. Any questions? Any comments from other funding and achievement members?
So really good meeting. It was good. It was good to hear them all at one time, but individually.
Long, but very good.
Yes, so it was not a brief meeting. It was very helpful.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item will end up being an action item, and Ben, this is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Rowe. So this is an action item. It is a request that we're asking you to endorse for submission to the legislature for the release of a special purpose appropriation at its upcoming May emergency board meeting. So I'm going to give you, that's a lot. I'm going to give you the background, especially for newer commissioners. For most of you, this will be familiar because you've heard a related and approved a related request in January. A similar request in January. But let me take you back to the origin of this, which was the 2023 legislative session and the legislature and the governor's decision to put $25 million of the 2023-25 budget into a fund to support financial sustainability at Oregon's technical and regional universities. And those are the 5 regional and technical universities: Portland State, Eastern, Western, Southern, Oregon Tech. Those institutions have struggled to remain financially sustainable in the context of changing demographics, regional economic needs, the insufficiency of state appropriation. And the legislature back in 2023 indicated, look, we want to make an investment of one-time dollars to support transformational efforts at those institutions to become more financially sustainable over the long term. In that decision, that $25 million decision, the legislature said the initial tranche, a roughly $6 million tranche, should be allocated by HECC to those institutions by formula And that went out the door pretty quickly. So in summer or early fall of 2023, the HECC staff distributed 6 million to those institutions for them to use as essentially as they saw fit. The legislative budget note that described all of this referred to those as proof of concept efforts that would help kind of build the case for the type of work that universities would do with the remainder of the funding. The legislature also charged the HECC to work with the institutions to develop a recommendation for the legislative committee, emergency board committee, to consider later in the biennium for the release of the remaining almost 19 million. So it's set up in 2 tranches, the first of which was essentially directly appropriated, the second of which required coming back with a report and set of recommendations to the legislature and would require subsequent legislative action in order to release. So in a sense, the legislature was saying, look, we want to be convinced that you have a plan and a good plan before we release the remaining 19 million. We discussed this last in January when I and members of university leadership relayed to you or recommended to you the report and recommendations that emerged from a highly collaborative work group consisting of university administrators, faculty representatives, student representatives, staff representatives, and supported by a consulting firm, NCHEMS, that devised a plan for how to invest the 19 million. And we asked you to endorse that plan, and we took that to the legislature in February for their consideration. We presented that recommendation and report at a legislative committee meeting in early February. The legislature did not take action upon that request, so they adjourned in March the short session without having approved that request for the release of the remaining almost $19 million. They directed us, I think I will say it wasn't formal, but it was communicated to us and to university leaders that the HECC should come back to a subsequent emergency board meeting, and this is a regular committee of the legislature that meets when the full legislature is not in session, to make certain types of budget decisions that are that it is allowed to make under law, that's sort of delegated to this board. And we were advised to come back with a revised request. And so what's in your packet today and what I'm asking you to endorse is a modestly revised approach to the release and spending of the remaining $19 million. So what we've done since the conclusion of the legislative session, in consultation with legislative leaders and with university leaders, is revise the request. And I would say revise it in ways that I'm pleased to say align with some of the feedback that we heard from you at this commission in your January meeting, including the emphasis that our proposed approach to the spending of the 19 million, if approved by the legislature later this month, alignment with existing or emerging institution-wide plans for strategic transformation for sustainability. So I'll stick with this particular point for a moment. Recall that these funds will support some very specific project activity at each of the institutions. One of the pieces of feedback this commission gave was that the institutions themselves need to have a larger plan, right? Not just a small project that this funding can help to support, but a larger plan for institution-wide strategic transformation for sustainability. And what this revised request does is emphasize and require the institution to demonstrate that the specific investment that we're making, that they're proposing, and that we would make is aligned with a larger plan for transformation. This revised request also sharpens the emphasis on sharpens the requirement that the institution demonstrates that a one-time investment will yield ongoing cost savings or revenue growth or both in order to help close budget gaps. So there's a greater emphasis on the requirement that the institution demonstrate that this will have the intended effect. We continue to, within this proposal, require the institutions to show that the projects reflect ongoing collaboration with the larger campus community and are aligned with Oregon's higher education goals. Finally, and maybe most importantly, in some contrast to the prior proposal, we've called out 3 areas and put a little bit of definition around them that institutions will be required to create proposals within. So funding that the HECC would administer, again, assuming you approve this to go forward, and the legislature approves that later this month, projects that we accept for consideration and potential funding will need to fit in one or more of the 3 categories that are on page 2 of the docket item. Those include strategic cost cutting, such as through early retirement incentives, paying upfront expenses for administrative efficiencies or retiring debt. Number 2, growing revenue, such as through equipment purchases that allow the expansion of high demand programs that could attract greater student enrollment and increase revenue to the institution. Or number 3, collaborative activities, such as funding upfront costs associated with the development of shared academic or administrative or student support services. Those are meant to be illustrative, not the entire universe of examples within each of those 3 categories, but institutions will be required to identify which one or more of those 3 categories their proposal fits within. And then I said finally, but this will be sort of the actual finally, the revised proposal also indicates or expresses that the determinations about what to fund will be made by HECC staff. We will certainly work through a sort of transparent process with our universities, so they know the criteria that we're applying and how we're making decisions. It would be an iterative process. If we determined that an institution had not met one or more of these criteria, they'd have the opportunity to share different or additional information or use their approach. But nevertheless, in contrast to the prior model where those decisions would have been made by a work group that consisted of institutional representatives and the HECC, in this case, we really clearly established that that decision will be made by HECC staff. There are elements of this proposal, I think substantial elements of this proposal that have not changed from what we presented in February, including the fact that dollars will be available up to a cap for each institution. So we're trying not to pit one institution against another. They're not competing for the same dollar. They each have a ceiling to which they are eligible, with a $2.5 million set aside for collaborative projects. So the emergency board is scheduled to meet on May 31st. Within your docket, as attachment A, is the letter that we submitted according to the deadline that agencies received the week before last. That letter notes that the request is pending approval by the commission. So we went ahead and submitted that, but legislative staff understand that this commission, under its policies, needs to act in order to endorse this request before it should be fully considered. We've had some communication since submission of the letter with legislative leaders and LFO, Legislative Fiscal Office staff, or providing some additional information to them about the types of projects that universities are considering. But again, if approved in this form, the legislature would not be approving specific projects. They would be approving the release of the $19 million to the HECC for a process of funding specific institutional projects consistent with the what's described and proposed in the letter. Finally, at least the third time I've said finally, but really finally, but docket item 8.2B is a letter from the presidents of the technical regional universities in Portland State endorsing this request. So been working and communicating with them, and very pleased at the collaborative work that we've done to come up with these revisions.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for Ben?
Well, thank you, Chair. So Ben, I appreciate the specificity this time of the buckets of proposed projects. The other piece, I also appreciate that I know in the first round, there was, support for collaborative projects that did not really come to any kind of fruition. So I appreciate having that set aside for collaboration. In that 2.5 million, has it been determined that it's like anyone can ask for 2.5 million, or is there a formula with the truth to access those funds? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we have not specified or published a particular methodology or approach to that. At this point, what we've conveyed is, in a sense, any two or more institutions could come up with a proposal and bring that to the HECC for consideration. I'm pleased to say that the level of collaboration amongst these 5 institutions is very, very high. And I expect that what we will receive in requests for this 2.5 million will be sort of a shared, agreed upon project or set of projects that reflect kind of their collective preferred approach. So I don't see that becoming a sort of a competitive space because of the level of conversation that those 5 institutions are having amongst each other with each other. It may be more than one, and it won't necessarily be the case that everyone would involve all 5, but I think we will see, I know that we will see proposals that are multi-institutional and that they all will have, I believe that they all will have endorsed the approach.
I really appreciate the more specificity this time with these funds.
Things.
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Farrar.
Ben, so I got a 2-parter. So just wanted to confirm what you said about the recommendation before the commission today, and that's release of funding to the HECC, not necessarily release of funding to the institution. So,
yes, so it is what you are being asked to vote on today is a request to the legislature to release the funds to the HECC, but not a HECC decision about how those funds will be released to the institutions. To be clear, we do not intend to bring those specific project funding decisions back to the commission. That we will administer if approved in this fashion and absent any other direction from the legislature, we will administer this funding at the staff level according to criteria that are consistent with what you read.
Okay. So second part of the question is, I agree with maybe this commission doesn't need to get into the details of the specific projects, but I think we should be interested in the longer term strategic transformational plans to achieve sustainability at these institutions. So I guess the question is, to what extent does the HECC Commission have visibility into those institutional plans for sustainability?
It's a great question, and I agree with the value of the commission having kind of visibility at that level. I'll note that I think a year ago, I'm looking to Mark, well, you may not know because you're relatively new, but President Bailey from Southern Oregon University presented to the commission that institutions then not yet approved, but nearly about to be approved by their board, a plan for institutional transformation. Similar processes have either gone on or are underway at the other 4 institutions. And your question suggests to me that we can do some work in connection with this project, since it's called out here, bring that to the commission, figure out a way to bring that to the commission, whether it's presentations or some other format for understanding what each of those other 4 institutions is doing.
Very, very important point and question, I think. And also, if we look at it individually, we still at some point will have to, they have such good communication with each other. I know they will learn from each other and share the lessons, but it would be nice for us to see those 2 across the institutions. Just a step further. Any other questions? This is a huge improvement, and part of that is because all of the work that Ben did after both we raised questions and then the legislature didn't do it. Didn't release the funds and the college presidents, to have that direct with them collaborating on it directly instead of assigning it to someone else and you doing it. I just really appreciate all that went into it. And I know a lot of staff work went into what you did. So.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Jim Pinkert's in the room. He's been a part of this from the very start and had a huge hand in both developing the original request with the work group and then helping modify that for this. Also, Ramona Rodemaker, our Deputy Executive Director, took a large role in helping me and others think about the approach to those funds. So yes, some really serious staff effort went into this. I don't want to no counting chickens, right? Like this still has to be, we will approve it today. It still needs to be approved by the legislature. I am cautiously optimistic. This is in their budget. It doesn't require them to take funds from other programs. That being said, it's a tight budget. It always is. And, it's see how the revenue forecast that comes out later this month looks. There are external factors that, do give me reason for caution, but nevertheless, optimistic.
Okay, can we have a motion to give our endorsement?
Move to endorse.
Thank you. Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Thank you. You have your endorsement, sir. You can even tell that it was enthusiastic.
Will do.
Okay, now we're going into pathways and the public university equity, educator equity plans. Veronica and John.
Thank you and good morning, Chair Rowe, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Veronica Dushel and I'm the Director for Academic Policy and Authorization at the HECC. Today, we will hear from leaders in the educator preparation programs at the regional public universities. We have 3 of them, Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, and Western Oregon University. They will present in turn. The first person presenting will be Vance Durrington, and he's the Director for the School of Education, Leadership, Health, and Humanities at SOU. Red Newman is the Dean at the College of Education at Eastern Oregon University, and Ma'am Girard is the Dean of the College of Education at Western Oregon University. They will share with you brief highlights on the university work they've been doing to implement their educator equity plans, share progress or lack of progress since the last update, which would have been 2 years ago in 2022. And today they will not be presenting on the entire plan, but rather focusing on a goal for the 24-26 period. So these are plans in anticipation of the cycle that begins now. These are not action items. The action item for you will be at the June 13th meeting when you will have all 6. You will hear from the remaining 3 institutions and have an opportunity to approve all 6 of them. The 6 public education programs have been supported by a community of practice that is focused on 4 areas: partnerships with the school districts, culturally sustaining candidate experiences, implementing state and national accreditation standards, and strengthening the evidence-based use for goal setting and continuous improvement. And with that, I will invite Vance Durrington. If you would please, do we have?
Yes. Over there.
Oh, over my shoulder. Would you please introduce yourself and proceed with your presentation? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vance Durrington. I'm the Director of the School of Education, Leadership, Health and Humanities at Southern Oregon University. I arrived at Southern Oregon in October of 2022. So I'm told I can't play my new card anymore, but it still feels like I'm pretty new. I apologize for not being with you there today. If I'd known President Belly was going to be there, I'd have probably hitched a ride with him, but there we go. So in terms of our educator equity plan, we had a few challenges, such as last year, we spent a lot of time dealing with budget deficit projections, and we're grateful to President Bailey as he continued to lead us through the process. We did some restructuring in our academic schools. For example, the School of Education has now become a Department of Education in the School of Education, Leadership, Health, and Humanities. So it's one department that also includes English, Health and Exercise Science, Outdoor Adventure Leadership, Philosophy, ROTC, Spanish, and ASL. So we're excited about the new dynamic and opportunities that all those departments in one school has, and we're looking forward to seeing what it provides for us. The Education Department has done a wonderful job in preparing our future teachers. A primary focus of the previous grant was to ensure that all the students experience an equitable opportunity for success. The previous grant was instrumental in the cultural and linguistically diverse population in the Education Department growing. It grew from 29% to 32% in the 2 years or year and a half that I've been here, and since the grant was initiated. And initiatives that I think contributed to this growth were the culture circles that were supported by the grant in 21-22, and then were continued on by the student organizations the next year. The culturally and linguistically diverse student navigators were available to mentor students and ensure those with a desire to teach were connected to advisors in the Educator Preparation Program. Student groups composed of EPP and non-EPP students met together to form communities and support one another. Workshops were offered to in-service and pre-service teachers with specifically related to cultural diversity, including topics such as travel history, shared history. I think on a side note, one of the things we discovered as well with these workshops was the emphasis on school mental and behavioral health. And part of the things that came out of that were we had a grant from Cambia Health to do an initiative in that area as well. And I think a lot of that resulted from what we learned in our workshops. Some of the faculty teaching methods courses formed a culture responsive teaching community, and they participated in community meetings and research throughout the year. They also engaged in book studies that encouraged them to reflect on their own teaching and curriculum for cultural responsiveness. One of the things we're really excited about in the next round is that we're given the opportunity to narrow our focus, and this presents even more exciting opportunities for us, because one of the things SOU has been intentional on is focusing on developing stronger relations with the Oregon's tribal nations. And so in alignment with that commitment, they have hired Kimwanakahi Kravitz, has joined the SOUs as the Native Nations liaison. Kimwani is a member of the Madesi Band of Pitt River Nation and a descendant of the Northern Wintu people. And one focus for Kimwani is to develop memorandums of understanding with Oregon's tribes. So that will also be our focus with our grant, is to focus on Native American, Alaska Native students. In the 2 years that we've, from the previous grant, our Native student population was at 0.69% compared to the university of 1.32%, but it has grown to 1.76%. Not very good still, but it's actually larger than what our university population is. But we're hoping we can do a lot more with Kimwani's guidance and support. So with her addition, we're working closely with others to ensure that our initiatives align with her work, so that we're working together and in parallel rather than with cross purposes. So within that context, some of the things that we want to do are hire a pathways educator, Native educator, who would work with Kimwani to encourage students to become teachers in education, either in different capacities, K-12, elementary, special needs. We want to support her visits to tribal nations and summits. We want to support student workers and mentors. We have a mixture of juniors and seniors and freshmen and sophomores, and we'd like to develop those juniors and seniors to be mentors for other students. We want to continue to offer workshops that focus on that aspect of tribal history, shared history. One of the things that we would like to do is use this, the ideas and things that we gather from this grant to try to initiate other initiatives and pursue other grants. One idea that we've had is to pursue grants from the National Endowment for the Humanities to bring together students, Native students who are interested in becoming teachers and those who are already K-12 teachers, to provide a forum for them to discuss the challenges they face, to also give them mentoring guidance, and also to talk with educator preparation programs about how we can do a better job of being more open to the needs of those who are from native tribal nations. We also are working to reimagine our Masters of Arts in Teaching program. One of the things we would like to do is actually have one course that was committed to the Senate Bill 13 initiative of tribal history, shared history. We feel like that's because that's such an important. I moved here from North Carolina. This is the first time I've seen a bill that was actually about curriculum that has such a high level of importance. And so we're committed to making sure that we're addressing that, not just that we're addressing the bill, but also including the spirit of the bill and making sure that our teachers will know how to integrate that history into their courses. So I would just end by saying I want to make sure I thank you all for your support of this program. And I also want to thank the commission for even including educators, the future educators in their next funding proposal. I hope it all goes through, and we are always appreciative of your support. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the next person listed is Dean Newman from Eastern Oregon University.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. As Commissioner, the chair of the commission has indicated, my name is Ray Newman. I am the Dean of the College of Education at Eastern Oregon University, and I have the pleasure of sharing with you our continuation of our equity plan. We actually are following along with the exact same goals that we had previously, because we are finding to have such continued growth with all of our opportunities. So we have three different priorities that are all feeding into our overall goal, which is the recruitment and retention of diverse teachers for the rural regions. So there are three different pieces that we have focusing in on this. Is one of them we have an instructional assistant pathway. Our first year of our pathway, we only had one individual who was signed up going through this. This second year of our pathway, we now have 7 seniors and we have 10 juniors. So we are actually recruiting a very diverse population, because one of the things we know is our most diverse populations in our schools right now are traditionally our paraprofessionals or instructional assistants. So through the access that we've been able to do with the work with our equity grant, we've been able to provide an opportunity for individuals to maintain their positions while completing their education program. So this is a huge piece. So again, this growth is tremendous, and just a really great opportunity for those individuals who want to be in the education field to continue and become teachers in their schools. The second piece, which really goes back to the high schools, is a future educators recruitment piece. One of the things we know in our rural regions, it's very difficult right now to recruit individuals to institutions across the state. So one of the things we're doing is we're trying to get individuals interested in education earlier, and that's starting at the high school level. So we have one of our College of Education faculty, Dr. Angela Bostenkool, who's actually teaching an early college initiatives course with high school students, because one of the things we also know is those connections to faculty and to their educators is really important to get them that access to higher education to help navigate a lot of these systems and to build those relationships. So this year is our first year of implementing this system. We have one high school that is completely synchronous with 5 students that are interested and enrolled in this program. We have 4 high schools enrolled in our asynchronous opportunity with 12 students enrolled. And as a component of this, they also have the opportunity to achieve college credits for attending a practicum, which is working with elementary school teachers, trying to get them interested. And we have 15 students participating in that. So we're really excited that this is growing that high school pathway, getting students interested, hopefully then being hired as IAs as that next step, and then continuing their role in education and to become that classroom teacher. The third prong of our process that we have been focusing on is our mentor teacher training. And one of the things, mentor teachers have a huge impact for those retaining, going through an educator preparation program, but also into the profession and keeping those individuals who are diverse into the population and into the education workforce population. So that's one of our third prong of our overall goal. We've had our second mentor teacher training actually on May the 4th. So May the 4th be with you was our theme. And we had a really great turnout. Our first training, we had 25 teachers that were participating. And in this last one, we had 18 that are still interested and willing to be mentor teachers for our teacher candidates. We know if they're great mentor teachers for our candidates, they're going to be great mentor teachers for those new teachers coming into our buildings as well in the future. So our goal again is going to remain to be the recruitment and retention of diverse candidates in the rural area. And it's just very important because as we know, we're hearing more and more that there's another 2 schools that are closing in our rural region, and we cannot lose these schools in our rural populations because these are the heart and center of these populations. So we need to do whatever we can do to ensure that they have teachers and that these schools can remain open and educate our future students. Excited and want to thank the commission for all of the work and the opportunity to continue this work. It is long-term work. It's not short-term work, especially since we are looking at the high school level and building it all the way through the profession. So we thank the commission for continuing and allowing us to do this work and moving forward. And just like my predecessor indicated, any funding would be very helpful, especially any funding that we can do, such as barrier reduction scholarships, would be very helpful because when we're talking right now to all of our teacher candidates or people who are interested in possibly becoming educators, one of the things we continue to hear is the cost of becoming an educator. And they're then later have this burden of paying off their debts. So whatever we can do to help that, it would be very important in reducing those barriers that our current students have.
Thank you. Veronica, any other presenters?
Yes, we do have March Road, the Dean of the School of Education at Western Oregon University, and he's the final one.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Girard, yes, and I serve as the Dean of the College of Education at Western Oregon University. I'm going to give you just the highest highlights at Western Oregon University. I appreciate hearing what my colleagues at Eastern and Southern are doing. That's always informative. I'm not going to tell you much about our kind of projects, parts and pieces that our money from the Higher Education Coordinating Commission is funding. I'm going to talk to you more about kind of the investigative work that we've been doing. So using the concept of kind of an enrollment funnel describing recruitment, retention, admission, and program completion, we've got some really clear findings that show several things. I just want to give you these highlights. First, BIPOC education students are recruited to Western in rates closely equivalent to BIPOC students across campus. Okay, so that's a good thing. We don't have probably a recruitment issue differential for the target audience here. BIPOC education students are retained at a higher rate and tend to graduate at rates at least equivalent to the general population at Western. That's a good thing. Our graduate programs do hold substantially fewer culturally and linguistically diverse education students. So that's something that we're looking at carefully. Transfer education majors are more often BIPOC than other transfer students. So that's a positive handle for us. We're doubling down on our transfer pathways. Program admission does not represent a barrier for our diverse candidates, but program completion seems to be less likely for our BIPOC students. So these things have led faculty to 2 major studies that are in progress right now. One, we continue to believe that for whatever reason, kind of that junior, senior in higher ed, that's sometimes called the murky middle, we do worry that we're losing students in that space. So we're going to do kind of a middle grades retention study and try to understand that. Second study is kind of a program completion study. And again, this is where we need to sit down with a whole bunch of candidates and really try to understand deeply the student experience of matriculating through our programs. Try to understand barriers and eliminate or reduce those barriers. This is the work that we're focused on. Our kind of focus goal for the next biennium is just continuing to try to more deeply understand the student experiences. So we've taken this big sort of data approach And now we need to really dial in deeply and understand the individual student experiences. This is following a series of kind of continuous improvement cycles that we've been pursuing over the last, 8 years of this work, and guided by a framework of access, affordability, and equity that's come out of some of our other Grow Your Own grants work. So all of that to say, the total number of BIPOC completers at Western Oregon University grew from only 18 in the 2018-19 year to 48 in the 2023-2024 year. Despite that growth, that number still only represents 26% of our preliminary licensure graduates for this year. And as a large producer of teachers in the state of Oregon, we want to see that number be closer to 40% or even 50%. Oregon needs Western Oregon University to produce large numbers of culturally and linguistically diverse educators. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the goal that we're holding ourselves responsible to. Okay, what I really want to talk about, though, is how HECC and how our other state agencies can be helpful in this space, okay? So first of all, we've got to understand that we have a distribution of authority problem in the state of Oregon. So let's just talk about who has a stake in this work, right? The Oregon Department of Education, Teacher Standards and Practices, Higher Education Coordinating Commission is involved in this, Educator Advancement Council is involved in this work, lots of state agencies. The problem is no one agency owns it, okay? Think about on the profession side, the Oregon School Personnel Association, the Oregon Education Association, the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators. All of these state agencies also play critical roles in this work, not to mention 14 educator preparation programs, 17 Oregon community colleges, 197 school districts, and 19 education service districts. We have a distribution problem because no one authority is minding the sort of total Oregon efforts for educator workforce development. We're making a lot of great progress, folks. We're putting the parts and pieces in place, but I want to offer some very specific things. So first of all, super grateful to the Senate Education Committee in the last legislative session for identifying, I'm sorry, I lost my notes here, identifying working conditions that contribute to recruitment and retention in the educator workforce. We need to continue to revisit that legislation, expand it, fund it, make progress. We need a comprehensive salary study. I'm super grateful that HECC is involved in this space right now, working on a salary study. We need to figure out compensation models that attract and retain high quality, culturally and linguistically diverse educators in the state. We need a comprehensive data system. And again, coming out of the last session, Senate Bill 283 is working on this right now, and that's super positive. We have to have a system, though, that allows us to set priorities, test hypotheses, and tinker over time toward making improvements to build the Oregon educator workforce that our children and families in the state need us to prepare. There's several investments in legislative concept right now, including the Oregon Future Educators Grant Program that's going to contribute to the elimination of financial barriers. We need those kinds of tools in place in the state. We need continued investments and messaging about this as a statewide priority. We're not going to move the needle quickly on this. We need, we've been at it for a decade, and the truth of it is we haven't moved the needle very far. That is the reality. We just haven't. And in fact, we've backed up a little bit in terms, if our goal is to build an educator workforce that has the cultural and linguistic assets that our children have, we've actually backed up a little bit. Anyway, lots of parts and pieces in place. We need coordination across those things. I'm hoping that our state agency heads will continue to meet and convene and break down those barriers and find synergy across our efforts in the state. Few things matter more than educator workforce development. We all know this, right? Education outcomes are related to employment, incarceration, divorce, mental health, suicide. Folks, if we do this right, we will reap the benefits for a generation. I'm hoping we can hold ourselves accountable to making progress in this space. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to all our presenters. It's really gives us a good overview picture. Veronica, do you have any closing remarks?
Not any particular closing remarks. So these presentations were not intended, they were informational, not intended for you to make a decision At the next meeting in June, we will have the remaining 3 institutions that have equity programs or equity plans to present. And at that time, there will be an opportunity to approve them or give some feedback. In terms of the challenges that exist, we do have an Educator Advancement Council that has agency heads from the Teachers Standards and Policies group, from ODE, from HECC. And there is an awareness of the need for greater coordination and integration of the work. And in response to the comments you heard, it continues to be a frustration that there are some opportunities for exploring that and continuing the work.
Thank you. Any questions for any of our 3 presenters or for Veronica? Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Chair Rowe. Just a quick question. It's going back, if I understand the legislation, the goal is that the educator workforce would match the sort of the diverse population of people we serve. I think the presentations that we've heard are focused pretty much on creating a more diverse pool of candidates or people who could be hired into those roles. And I'm just wondering, is there any parallel work being done in the areas of recruiting and hiring practices that may be coordinated with that in order to achieve that overall legislative goal?
So I will defer to Erin Weeks-Up, who might be listening in, and perhaps to my colleague, Amy Cox. We do know that the OLDC, that research collaborative, has been doing work on research on the numbers, the recruitment, the retention, and efforts in that space. And I believe there's been an initial draft, but we are anxiously waiting to see what the evidence suggests about where the challenges are in that stream.
Thank you. Other questions? I did not realize the amount of work that was going on already in the state. So I think the moves and the calls to coordinate more with it are certainly important, because getting enough teachers who match the cultural abilities and cultural experiences of the students, anybody can see how important that is. So I hope we continue to be helpful in that, and we thank you for the progress we have made, even though we all want more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to our lunch time. We're a few minutes early. Is lunch here? And you want to take so what we're going to do is get lunch, then we're going to break into groups after lunch or as we eat and begin discussion.
We'll begin as a whole. So when we come back at 12:15, and you're welcome to still be eating your lunch, don't feel like you have to rush through that. The first portion of the afternoon will be together. And then at some point, Coragio will invite us to go into our small groups.
Okay, and for those of you online, you commissioners online, you realize we will have a separate group for you. I have some remarks. I want to kind of set the table for us after lunch with the strategic planning. So we will start with my remarks and then go into group. And commissioners online, should that be at?
So 12:15 will reconvene the meeting as a whole. And then the Coragio agenda is in your packet, but it would be at some point, an hour or so later when we actually get into the small groups.
Okay, so commissioners online, I will make my remarks beginning at 12:15. Okay, thank you very much for your attention and participation this morning. Good questions, appreciate it. Let's have lunch. Ready to resume?
We are on audio again.
If you want to start by introducing our guests.
Yeah, sure. So, let folks know who's in the room. Commissioners, you are joined by most, if not all, of the HECC executive team. A couple of folks are joining by phone, but most of them are in the room. I think that when you get into your small groups, which will include members of that team, get to know them if you don't already. So perhaps save introductions for that small group setting, but I'm really pleased that we've got both commissioners and our staff leaders here today to make this important conversation. We're also joined by our contractors for the consultants for the strategic planning effort and the from the Coraggio group, allow them to introduce themselves in a moment as they kick us off. And simply, very quick by way of background, because Coraggio will get more into the weeds, just note that we are sort of midway in the strategic planning process, believe it or not. I've done work on vision and mission going back to the fall, and a few minutes on that later today. And this is really a great opportunity to take stock of what we heard and Coraggio's heard for the public input process that they facilitated, and start to get on paper your suggestions, ideas about next steps. I'll finally remind you that there is a core planning team that includes a couple of commissioners, several of the staff leaders who are in the room, and Mercero from the Workforce Board, who I will introduce, because she's also joining us. She's the chair of the Workforce Talent Development Board. So that core planning team will take the product of what you produced today and the project's help turn that into a draft for your consideration and additional public input, feedback, and both the editor process from there. So that's where we are, and turn it over to you for.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone who is here this morning, and welcome to Coraggio and our other guests and staff. I'm really looking forward to being able to let commissioners plan with senior staff. But before you can get started, I've got a few words, well, actually more than a few words. I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of set the stage for us and summarize philosophically the things we have going on and the sort of where we're headed so far, so that we have some framing and I hope a little bit of clarity around direction. Then gave me helpfully some clarifying questions that I used as I put together these remarks. This first question to me was sort of why is a strategic plan important right now? And some of this you've heard before, but I really believe that it is very difficult to imagine a more appropriate time for strategic planning for the HECC. We all know the enormous challenges facing higher education. The main ones I think of as I think about the challenges are, first of all, the double whammy of demography, both the decline in the numbers of high school graduates and the decline in the numbers of those who are choosing to go to college and universities. The massive technological change in society, the very real question of whether higher education is really prepared to fully adapt to those changes in technology and to make whatever structural changes are then needed to meet the societal and workplace needs. The third one I think of is the ever increasing price tag of higher education to students and families. And we know from listening to the schools, from listening to our partners in leadership at universities and colleges, the cost to them of providing this education as they are currently structured. Both of those things, I think, threaten the economic stability of some institutions. We've been seeing that. And of course, they pile debt on students that can follow them for decades. I think this path is just unsustainable. The truth is there have to be changes in that somewhere. And currently, of course, the political winds are very disturbing. Many people encourage pigeonholing higher education as an elite option that's not welcoming to many, not tolerant of differences, not of good value, and not particularly beneficial to society. We can spend all day insisting that is wrong, but we can't wave away this public perception that's a strongly held belief in some people and is really now used, as we know and see, as a political tactic. So that's my summary of the problems. You've heard me say this before. These circumstances are national in origin, and but they're no less present in Oregon. They acknowledge the most threatening headwinds we face. They give a context in which we are drafting a strategic plan, but they don't set the direction of the specific things we need to do in the strategic plan. They suggest more the scope and the urgency of the task and of the priorities that we set. Strategic planning is about choices, and I think it's important to remember that at every stage of strategic planning. And the strength of the individual will and the culture committed to those choices. But planning really is about choosing what you're going to honor, what you're going to accomplish, how you're going to do that. Many people inside and outside higher education believe the scope of the problems urgently requires fundamental changes. I agree with that to a large extent. And that's why we need a plan for our current circumstances. So what we're going to produce can't be a anytime, any place strategic plan. It really needs to be in the context of the problems and challenges we have. Ben also asked me to talk a little bit about what we need a new strategic plan to do for our commission and for our state. Again, it's back to choices. Among other things, we really need a strategic plan to clarify and underscore the scope of HECC's role within Oregon post-secondary education and the priorities we have in the state. So what is HECC's role? What is our authority given to us by the legislature? And what priorities do we have as a state? As you know, Oregon colleges and universities have their own very necessary and effective governing boards. But any state higher education system isn't just a collection of schools and buildings and individual schools' distinctive leadership. We have to have a systemic mindset and approach that benefits the various institutions and that can be fully realized for the state's economic well-being and for all its people. That requires coordination. It requires substantive partnerships among schools. It requires leadership at a systemic level to make the most of the resources we have. We have an urgent need for HECC to lead in setting those priorities and in driving clearly apparent results. The plan should convey the scope of the most important policy needs and the urgency of addressing them. Bottom line for me is that I expect the new strategic plan to distill the expectations we and our partners have, the most important, the expectations that citizens of Oregon have for post-secondary educational opportunities. We will set out the path that we commit to follow. We need this strategic plan to very clearly demonstrate how the HECC is going to act on our responsibilities. So this plan isn't hopes and dreams. I really hope you agree with me that this plan needs to be action. What questions do we need the strategic plan to answer? I'm starting with just 4. One is, what real action can we take to encourage and assist the reduction of overhead costs to schools, potential unnecessary duplication at schools, overly complex pathways for students, and other burdens that add to the very real cost of higher education? A second one is, what must we do to improve students' completion of programs and degrees they choose? More specifically, how should we address the extraordinary increase in support services, including counseling, food, housing needs of students of all ages in all programs? Can this be better planned and delivered? And could it potentially be funded system-wide? Are there model ways of providing and sustaining more support for students, especially for first-generation and economically disadvantaged students? This is what we're hearing from colleges and universities, is that literally just in the last 5 years, if you took the last year before the pandemic to today, that it's the increased factor is, it's geometric almost. I mean, it really is not just a straight line increase. It's so much greater. And the resources that colleges and universities are using to begin to address this are really, I mean, great ingenuity, but a lot of it there's kind of scraping together. And so that's one of the areas that I think we should ask, is there a systemic approach we could consider and should consider? My third question is, to determine and define the HECC leadership needed to help develop an overall overall development plan for Oregon and to meet anticipated workplace needs. We really need to be clear on this, and we're very glad to have help do that. Okay, the most vexing question to me, though, the most unpleasant, is that those of us working in higher education have the absolute and clearly justified conviction that significantly more state funding is needed to ease the burden of higher education, the students, and to sustain strong higher education institutions, and to create better conditions to fill workplace needs. Attaining the funding is perhaps the most important work we do. But, there's my big but. If the governor and the legislature have a longer list of priorities for the state during the life of this strategic plan, and if we don't have the ability to change their minds on that, then how do we proceed to achieve our most important priorities without transformational additional funding? And that's a real problem we have to deal with. Inaction and then just blaming the lawmakers and the political leaders for failure isn't an option at this point. The need for action is that urgent, that even if we don't get the money we need and that higher education deserves, we still have to set priorities that we can achieve. So we need to find ways to increase the impact of the funding we have. Accomplishing that will require our best thinking and utmost effort. How do we think last global group? How do we think this plan might be different? I can't predict how the strategic plan will be different from previous ones, but I can tell you my hope for it. In previous years, we've undertaken the very hard work of setting the philosophy, the principles, and the ideals of Oregon higher education. We've successfully incorporated most of those into our work. And I thank the staff for that, and led the way. What is required now, I believe, is a concrete and no less ambitious plan that sketches a roadmap for success. As I said, not hopes and dreams, but clear direction and relentless focus toward targeted and essential goals using every tool the legislature has given us. I've learned a lot during my years, 5 years, maybe almost 6 on the HECC. I want to tell you about my biggest aha moment. It came very early, maybe in the first couple of years, and someone in a meeting, I think it was probably you, Ben, referred to the exclusionary model of higher education and post-secondary training for today as exclusionary. And said that it really just was not the exclusionary model of higher education, mainly, of course, elite university education, just was not suitable for today and the future. That it must be higher education and post-secondary training must be available in a way and at a time of life for all learners to be able to access its benefits. Kind of horrified by it now, but it really had never occurred to me. That's how inculcated the exclusionary system was, that I really had never imagined that anything else could exist. And so that moment it completely turned me around. It set my North Star for the work on this commission. It set my North Star for higher education in Oregon, and it guides me still as we undertake this work. So thank you very much for listening and for all the work you do. Glad to be in it with you.
Ben, anything else that you want to add before we get started? Okay, great. Thank you, Educator, for those comments, for really setting the stage around the urgency and importance of this particular strategic plan for our state. We're excited to be with you today. I am Sarah Lechner. I'm a principal consultant with Carmaggio Group. And as Ben mentioned, we are working with the HECC in this strategic planning process. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Susan Kurowski. And then we also, you probably saw her come in and out of the room, Colleen, there she is, Colleen Floyd.
She is in the Santiam room and is going to be managing a breakout group with all the folks that are virtual today because we'll be doing some group work. So thank you, Colleen, for being over there. So our agenda, so we are with you all until 4 o'clock today. The first thing that we'll be doing is reviewing the themes from the situation assessment that we shared, which captured what we heard in our stakeholder outreach process. We'll be spending a little bit of time debriefing those themes here together as a group. We'll make sure that everyone has a solid understanding of what will be included in the strategic plan, what are the different elements. We'll look at your feedback on vision and mission. We'll talk a little bit about kind of similar to what Chair Rowe just shared. We'll ask you to actually reflect back on what you just heard from her. And above all else, what do we need this plan to do? So we'll kind of talk about a plan theme or core focus. We will spend the bulk of our work in breakout groups thinking about goals, outcomes, and strategies for this next strategic plan. So this will very much be a working session where this full group can provide input for the planning team that Ben described to then refine and draft those elements of the next strategic plan. We'll be able to do a gallery walk, including viewing what the virtual breakout group puts together so everyone can see one another's work. And then we'll make sure everyone's clear on next steps. So wanted to first just orient people to where we're at in the strategic planning process. Ben, you mentioned we're halfway, and we are in fact about exactly halfway. So we've just completed what we call our Get Clear phase, which is where we were focused on gathering that input from key stakeholders. So we conducted interviews, focus groups, a survey, and pulled all of that together into the situation assessment report that you all have seen, so that we could bring those insights into the room as we're doing here today to inform the planning process. So we are now transitioning into the Get Focused phase. We'll be working in partnership with the strategic planning team to draft elements of the strategic plan. That will be an iterative process. So you'll also notice that it looks like in the fall, around September, we're going to do another round of stakeholder engagement to share those drafts, to test them, to reaffirm them with key folks, of course, yourselves as the commission, but also other key stakeholders. We'll go back to those same focus groups to get their feedback before finalizing the plan later in the fall. So I think I pretty clearly mentioned this, but I think it's always helpful to know, like, by 4 o'clock, what are we trying to achieve? Our output for the day is input from this full group on potential goals, outcomes, and strategies for the strategic plan. So we will be producing that input today, again, for consideration with the planning team. To then take that, refine it, and so we always like to start with some community agreements, knowing that we're dialogue today, we're going to be working in breakout groups. And so want to share these as some agreements that we would propose, request, that we all agree to ensure that we create an inclusive, collaborative, and effective working environment. So we ask that people both step up and step back. So both in full group and small group dialogue, we want everyone to contribute, and we want everyone to contribute. So please make space for others to contribute and notice how much airtime you're getting. Step back when needed, step up when needed. Please be creative and think boldly. So to Chair Rowe's earlier comments, we are in a time of great urgency. We really welcome that bold and creative thinking today. Assume good intent, but also be responsible for your impact in terms of what you say and share. We encourage curiosity and engagement. We do want to embrace healthy debate. and create a brave space for different perspectives and ideas. As I walk through the situation assessment, and I'm sure as you read it, and as you know, well, in your work, there are a lot of tension points. There are a lot of decision points. There will be disagreement. There will be different ideas. We encourage and we welcome those in the dialogue today. And don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So it is important that we are in a creative space as we think about how to address these critically important issues for our state. So let's be open and creative. Anything that anyone would like to add or change about the community agreements today? Do these work for folks? And everyone commit to them? Saying head nods, Colleen, I'm assuming will chime in and let us know if in the chat we're hearing anything. So, all right, great. Thanks, everyone. So the first thing, before we get into the situation assessment, before we get into dialogue, we wanted to get grounded in the HECC equity lens. So everyone here has a printed copy in front of you. If you don't, for folks out there, Susan, if you might help me get these out. And then I will share them on screen for those who are virtual here in a second. What we'd like everyone to do is to think about our work today. Think about what you know we're going to be focused on, making meaning of the stakeholder input, and then drafting, starting to give input on goals, outcomes, and strategies. And consider what particular questions within the equity lens do we want to ensure we are holding in mind today? What feel most relevant, most critical? Of course, they are all relevant, they are all critical. And as we think about today's work, what are those particular questions that feel really, really alive, so to speak, for you, that we really want to make sure that we are holding in mind, that we are raising as we move forward on this work? So I'm actually just going to give everyone some quiet reflection time to read through these first for a couple of minutes, and then to share out which questions you want to propose we prioritize or ensure we hold it. For those that are virtual, I'll spend a few minutes on these first 5 and then move to the next here in a couple of minutes so you can read them.
Do we know if we're in our little group yet?
Commissioner Devlin, we're still in the full group. We'll break out in a bit.
So as folks are ready, as you review the equity lens questions, are there any in particular that folks want to propose we elevate or really ensure we hold in mind today that feel most relevant? Yeah.
I thought number 4 was great, and that is written in the opportunity, through the lens of opportunity, as opposed to sort of after, this is a little dramatic, but sort of after the fact, oops, did we do something that's gonna have an impact? You know, now you're down the road on something. And I liked how that one was sort of like, as you're thinking about this, what opportunity does this strategy, you know, advance?
Great, thank you. Yeah, that definitely feels like, you know, we can consider today, how are the strategies that you might be proposing really enhancing those contexts? Thank you.
They're all very good, but yeah, I just spoke.
Number 9, also making sure that we're intentionally modify or enhance decisions or strategies for each of our communities, individual and cultural needs are meaningfully met. And emphasis on the meaningfully.
Yeah, thank you.
And I just upvote number 9.
Number 9 as well. Yeah, great. Ditto. Ditto it, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Are there any others that folks want to elevate today? Okay, so what is your commitment to diversification of the workforce and professional learning for equity? Resources are you allocating for educator employee diversity and training and cultural responsive instruction and practices? Yeah. Any others? And if anyone online wants to segment this brief, can share the chat with us. I think so. We heard 4, 8, 9.
Yeah, I think too, if, you know, some of them, of course, are interrelated, but I think being able to analyze strategy and the racial equity impact on other underserved groups, I think that it's important to remain focused on not just singular groups, but also all underserved groups as a whole. And that it includes the wider range of resource allocation, which I feel like goes back to that issue of what if we don't get any more funding? Right. Yeah. How are we going to modify what we already have?
I think that's right. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I would elevate 10 also. Because I think we spend too much time just looking at data and not reacting to the data. You know, participation increases, that's good, but we don't really ask why. It decreases, that's bad, but we don't really ask why. We don't seem to systematically evaluate what efforts we're making and whether they're effective or not, and whether we should be doing something differently.
Thank you, Richard. All right. Well, as I said earlier, of course, all of these are relevant and important throughout this process, and I think helpful to just name a few, kind of bring them into the room for conversation today. So invite folks to actively use this tool to raise these questions in your discussions in breakout groups. All right. So we are going to walk through the situation assessment themes at a high level. So you know that we were able to send the situation assessment to you all in advance. We're going to assume that folks have had a chance to read through it, but we did just want to do a refresh here today, again, to bring those themes into the room and to bring those stakeholder perspectives into the room. So just, again, a little bit of context or background to remind people how this situation assessment was developed. So it was based on our outreach in the Get Clear phase. So we had a survey with 408 responses. We had 36 people participate in 5 focus groups. And then we had 10 individual interviews. And so we used all of that input to look for what are the reoccurring themes that showed up from stakeholders across these different engagement efforts. So we have 9 themes. The first 2 were specific to the vision and mission that the commission had worked on updating and drafting. So we used that survey as an opportunity to test that updated vision and mission. We got some feedback on it. We have since then shared that back with Ben. He did another round of editing based on that feedback. And so that next version of the vision and mission is what you all just saw in a survey before we came together for this meeting. So we will look at that survey input here a little bit later after I go through the other themes. We are not going to wordsmith, probably hopefully to your great relief, vision and mission today, but we did just want to provide that update with, how did these now land? We will turn that over to the planning team to do another round of refining. So I won't talk about those themes, but I will again do a high level overview of the other themes today. So then starting with that first theme 3, affordability is the top issue facing higher education in Oregon. So not a surprise. I do want to just, before we dig into these, I want to remind everyone, again, as I shared, this is based on that stakeholder engagement or outreach that we did. These themes are based on stakeholder perspectives and perceptions. So it's very important, of course, that we consider those stakeholder perceptions and we bring them into the room as you shape the next strategic plan. However, further on in today, we'll talk about what should you be considering as you develop this next stakeholder or this next strategic plan. This situation assessment is one factor. So just acknowledging that very important to bring these perspectives and perceptions into the room and to use these insights and consider them. But of course, this is not a mandate. So this is what is top of mind for folks. And as Chair Rowe described, this kind of gives you more information about the context and what folks are thinking about. It will be up to you all to decide what you do with that information and how you choose to focus your efforts and resources, factoring this information in as one part of what influences that. Does that make sense? Anything that, great, okay. So just wanted to reiterate that before we begin. So affordability as a top issue. So not surprising. So and folks were referring to both affordability in terms of the cost of education, as well as affordability in terms of the cost of living, and then how that impacts students' ability to prioritize education. Not surprisingly, this is a place where there is some disagreement or tension around what should the HECC do about affordability? How can you influence around this? So, we saw some folks advocating for more resources or funding to institutions in order to impact affordability. We saw other folks advocating for getting more resources or funding in the hands of students to impact affordability. We did see within the commission slight more folks within the commission tending towards thinking that you should get funding into the hands of students. And this is a place where there's some, tension or just disagreement. Another thing that is relevant here that Chair Rowe mentioned is the perceived value of education. So, and how that is that, or how affordability is impacting the perceived value of education. Obviously, like a very close link there to how people are thinking about that value. And so with that in mind, we did hear from stakeholders an interest in the HECC playing a role in influencing that narrative about the value of education to individuals, to our communities. So theme 4 Competition among institutions points